Chapter 678. The Victoria's Secret fashion show had adopted the strategy of binding marketing with Yahoo since the beginning. During the live broadcast with more than 40 million viewers, Yahoo's name would be mentioned in every theme of the Victoria's Secret fashion show. Yahoo's logo would also appear frequently in the camera. There was even a plot of the Victoria's Secret angel soliciting votes on Yahoo's voting page in the highlights. Under such unsparing joint promotion, relying on the strong ratings and popularity of the Victoria's Secret fashion show, the audience who wanted to have a deeper understanding of the beautiful underwear fashion show opened Yahoo's website as long as they had internet at home. In the editorial department of Yahoo's portal in Boston, the person in charge of Yahoo's website operations, Jeff Locke, and the editor-in-chief of Yahoo, Tina Brown, were looking at the real-time user visits on the website's backend. They were excited. After the live broadcast of the Victoria's Secret fashion show, the number of real-time users on Yahoo's portal increased by 50% in just half an hour. Halfway through the live broadcast, Tina Brown pulled the main person in charge of Yahoo's editorial department into the conference room and began to discuss how to further expand the influence of Yahoo's portal with the popularity of the Victoria's Secret fashion show. However, less than 10 minutes into the meeting, Jeff Locke barged in and said urgently, "Tina, this is bad. The Yahoo Forums server is down." Although she had been focusing on media content, Tina Brown had been working hard for the past 6 months since she joined the industry. Hearing Jeff Locke's words, Tina Brown realized the seriousness of the matter and stood up immediately. The last time Yahoo experienced an outage was a few months ago when the company launched its YCR instant messaging software. Due to a lack of estimation of the growth rate of its users, YCR's server crashed. At that time, due to the debate about the world's largest data processing center in Breaking Bad Girls, YCR's server outage became the focus of ridicule from its competitors. Who would have thought that in less than half a year, Yahoo would experience a similar situation again? Tina Brown stood up and followed Jeff Locke out of the conference room. She asked, "Have you informed Ian and Steve?" Jeff Locke took out his phone and dialed a number. At the same time he explained, "I'll call them now." However, the technical department said it's not a big problem. We just need to restart the server. However, Tina Brown knew that things were definitely not as simple as what Jeff Locke thought. She shook her head and said, "Even if there's no technical problem, we'll definitely be in the headlines tomorrow." Jeff Locke was taken aback and smiled bitterly. The last time YCR's server crashed, Yahoo had lost a lot of face. Tonight, the website had a problem again at a time when everyone was looking forward to it. What followed was definitely a wave of mockery. After the call was connected, Jeff Locke briefly explained the situation to the CEO, Ian Neer. He quickly hung up and dialed Steve Mitnick's number. Due to the rapid expansion of the company, Yahoo's editorial department and headquarters were separated into 2 different office buildings. Tina Brown and Jeff Locke had just left Yahoo's editorial department building and were about to walk to the headquarters building nearby. Tina Brown's assistant quickly caught up with them with a phone in her hand. "Madam Brown, it's Mr. Williams calling." More than 10 minutes later, Yahoo's Victoria's Secret discussion area had returned to normal after the server reboot. The cause of the incident had also been identified. Victoria's Secret discussion area was a subcommunity of Yahoo's fashion forum. The server where it was located could withstand a maximum of 1 million visitors. For the current internet environment, this user capacity was originally very ample. However, due to the underestimation of the number of users once again, and the strong flow of traffic from the Yahoo portal's homepage, the number of visitors to the discussion area during the Victoria's Secret live broadcast skyrocketed. In the end, the number of visitors exceeded the server's capacity by more than twice. It formed a data flow that was like a flood breaking through a dam, and instantly crashed the server. After the Victoria's Secret discussion area returned to normal, Yahoo had to remove the Victoria's Secret discussion area's direct link from the homepage before the server capacity was resolved. Fortunately, the server outage this time lasted for a short period of time. After everything was restored, although it was inevitable that there would be some complaints from users, it was soon taken over by normal discussion posts. At ABC's headquarters, the live broadcast of the Victoria's Secret show had entered its final stage. Eric hung up the phone and curiously opened the Victoria's Secret discussion area that had returned to normal. There were all kinds of topics on the page. It was as if he could feel the noise. Can anyone tell me the name of the Victoria's Secret angel, who looks like Audrey Hepburn in the second scene? Calling for votes for my Cindy. The YCR fan tribe has been opened. Welcome to join. I love the second and third songs so much. Everyone, come in and play with the lyrics. I only remember a few lines. I really want to collect all the lyrics. Did no one notice the Leningrad Symphony? Eric Williams actually used this Soviet war song as the soundtrack. Does it mean something? Why are there so many stinky men here? My friends from Baltimore, if you want to discuss bra styles, come to my YCR tribe. Tribe number 952-7149. Where is the Victoria's Secret store in Philadelphia? Please tell me. Sob sob, that Baroque music is so sad. I cried listening to it. But I still want to listen to it 100 times. What should I do? Everyone pay attention to the TV. The Cinderella incident is coming. The Cinderella incident is coming. Diane Kruger's shoes are about to fall off. I want to lick them. Although only 20 posts could be displayed on one page, Eric could not help but smile when he saw some familiar topics on the page. Although the commercial prospects of online forums had always been poor, they were a great tool to gather the popularity of Internet users. They could even become an important stronghold to guide Internet public opinion. Just this alone was not something that could be compared to pure commercial potential. Eric was thinking about sorting out some of his memories about online forums and discussing it with Yahoo's management when the Victoria's Secret show on the TV screen finally came to an end. Soon, Nielsen also sent the final viewership figures. The average viewership of the Victoria's Secret show was 41.5 million. Because of the relentless hype of the Cinderella incident, the viewership figures reached the highest point of the show at 46 million when Diane Kruger's shoes fell off. The Super Bowl of the fashion industry. Early the next morning, the headline on the front page of the New York Post was such a blacked-out headline. The cover picture was also the opening scene of Diane Kruger, wearing a bright red British-style military uniform. Since the first live television broadcast, the Super Bowl had a viewership of more than 100 million people every year. It firmly occupied the throne of the annual viewership figures in the Federation. Almost no program could shake the position of the Super Bowl. In the past, whenever a TV program tried to associate itself with the live broadcast of the Super Bowl, it was often disdained and ridiculed by the audience. But this time, the New York Post crowned the Victoria's Secret show as the Super Bowl of the fashion industry, and almost no one objected. Although the final viewership of Survivor reached 56 million people, which was 10 million more than the peak viewership of the Victoria's Secret show, the viewership of the Victoria's Secret show among the audience aged 18 to 49 years old was 26.8%, which was 6% higher than Survivor. Moreover, the viewership of the Victoria's Secret show was the core audience aged 18 to 34 years old. In the eyes of advertisers, the commercial value of the Victoria's Secret show was definitely far higher than that of Survivor. After the viewership figures were released, hundreds of domestic and foreign TV stations contacted Firefly on the same day in an attempt to buy the television broadcast rights of the Victoria's Secret show. HBO, a subsidiary of Warner Brothers, even offered a sky-high price of $5 million in an attempt to buy the cable television broadcast rights of the Victoria's Secret show in the United States. While paying attention to the viewership of the Victoria's Secret show, the media did not let Yahoo off the hook either. That night, Yahoo's forum once again experienced an outage, which inevitably became the focus of ridicule by several major IT companies. But these ridicule did not cause any damage to Yahoo at all. Instead, it once again increased Yahoo's public awareness. Many media outlets also realized the potential connection between Yahoo and Victoria's Secret in the process of branding that lasted for half a year. The commentator of US Weekly used a lot of space to analyze this exquisite joint marketing in detail. While Yahoo's traffic was steadily rising, analysts from several mainstream investment banks raised their evaluation of Yahoo's market value. After the Victoria's Secret show was held in Manhattan a month ago, the sales of LTD's products and the company's stock price began to rise. After the television broadcast, the nationwide influence caused the sales of Victoria's Secret stores across the country to skyrocket. LTD's stock price also skyrocketed by 22% in the following week, causing LTD's market value to soar to $4.5 billion. However, while the Victoria's Secret show was a huge commercial success, it also attracted countless criticism. On the second day of the television broadcast, a large number of media people and conservative people, led by Thomas Peck, a commentator from the New York Times, criticized the Victoria's Secret show, which was full of sexual explorations, should not be broadcast on a national public television network like ABC. At the same time, the Federal Communications Commission (FCC) also received hundreds of complaint letters and phone calls, asking the FCC to ban ABC from broadcasting the Victoria's Secret show again, and to punish ABC at the same time. The criticism and complaints from conservative people and the media about the Victoria's Secret show aroused a chorus of agreement, but there were also many opponents, especially in the online community dominated by young people. The conservatives' attempt to ban the Victoria's Secret show was almost universally reviled. Some women's rights groups also objected to the conservatives' accusations. This dispute lasted for more than a week, and even set off several public cursing wars. Although there were no obvious violations of the Victoria's Secret show, under the pressure of all parties, the FCC had to meet with the heads of ABC and LTD to discuss ways to solve this problem. In a mature capitalist society, capitalists with 100% profits could commit all the sins in the world. This was actually an alternative embodiment of the power represented by capital. Therefore, it was impossible to ban a television show with more than 40 million viewers. The noise continued until just before Christmas, when the FCC and the producers of the Victoria's Secret show finally reached a compromise agreement. This year's and subsequent Victoria's Secret shows, if broadcast on public television, must be placed after 10 p.m. and must be marked with the TV14 logo to remind minors that it was not suitable for them to watch. At the same time as these things were happening, another unexpected thing also surprised and delighted many people. A week after the Victoria's Secret show, 1 million videotapes of the Victoria's Secret show officially went on sale. Emily and others were worried that no one would spend $30 to buy such a videotape that was only about 40 minutes long. Eric even planned in advance to treat the slow-selling videotapes as a gift. However, on the day of the release, 1 million videotapes were sold out. Firefly's distribution department had to urgently allocate resources to quickly produce another 1 million videotapes and put them on the market. They were also sold out. Perhaps the repeated shortages had formed a potential hunger marketing effect. Some media outlets also followed the trend and reported on it. In less than a month, the Victoria's Secret show's videotape sales were close to the 7 million mark. Firefly's distribution department finally reacted and took the time to do a survey. They found that 75% of the buyers bought the videotapes for the 6 songs in it. In other words, these people basically treated the Victoria's Secret show videotape as a music album. After a detailed evaluation, Firefly's distribution department estimated that the Victoria's Secret show's videotape sales would eventually exceed 20 million. What kind of concept was this? Each videotape of the Victoria's Secret show was priced at $29.90, which was actually $30. 20 million videotapes would bring in $600 million in sales. Because the Victoria's Secret show was only about 40 minutes long, the production cost of a videotape was only half of that of an ordinary movie. Excluding the distribution costs and the profits reserved by the channel operators, each videotape would bring about $15 in profit to the distributor, which was equivalent to half of the videotape sales, $300 million. The media, which had been entangled in Eric's abandonment of the movie and the loss of hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, were stunned to find that unknowingly, Eric had earned back this loss. The Victoria's Secret show music album, that came out of nowhere, also embarrassed music magazines such as Billboard and Rolling Stone. These well-known music magazines had their own weekly music charts, but in recent weeks, the weekly singles charts and other charts released by these magazines received a lot of boos. This was because none of the songs on these charts were from the Victoria's Secret show. In the hearts of music fans, any song from the Victoria's Secret show was strong enough to squeeze into the top of these charts. In this kind of one-sided booing, well-known musicians who originally wanted to release new singles at the end of the year postponed their plans. In fact, Billboard and other music media also had their own difficulties because Firefly Records did not take the usual route. When ordinary singers released a single, which one of them did not work very hard to chart through radio and TV stations. However, Firefly Records did not chart at all. So far, although the names of the 6 songs had been circulated, people still did not know which band or singer sang these songs. At Eric's request, Firefly Records did not disclose the specific information of these people. As a result, although the 6 songs of the Victoria's Secret show had been spread by music fans in private, and the videotapes of the Victoria's Secret show had been sold out one after another, except for a few public broadcasts by ABC TV and some cable TV stations that had bought the right to broadcast them, there was no trace of these 6 songs on TV or radio. If you don't chart, don't do PR, don't do publicity, and have no intention of showing your presence at all, how can I rank you? Just based on the sales of the Victoria's Secret show videotapes? After the Victoria's Secret show, Eric hid in Southampton to accompany his women and children. At this time, a pre-Christmas party was being held in the manor. In the living room, Emily hugged little Kevin intimately, but excitedly told Eric and the others about recent events. Jane Wenner of Rolling Stone can't reach you, so he can only call me. You don't know, but 2 days ago he sounded a little pitiful on the phone. He said that if we don't chart those songs, their music magazines will lose their credibility. Eric, why don't you let Firefly Records release those singers in advance? Now is a good time. Anyway, Victoria's Secret has already gotten what it wants, so it's not a big deal if those singers steal some of the limelight. Eric leaned casually on the sofa, closed the magazine in his hand, and shook his head at Emily. In addition to the consideration of Victoria's Secret, this situation is actually good for those newcomers. If we start promoting now, the media will easily divert the focus of attention from these newcomers to other places. After Easter next year, let them gradually release their singles. By then, Victoria's Secret will have cooled down, and the media will focus more on these newcomers. Emily said, I think you must be worried about affecting the sales of the Victoria's Secret videotapes. But this result is really surprising. 20 million boxes of sales may eventually bring in $300 million of profit. $300 million, TSK. Although LTD's annual sales have increased a lot, the annual profit this year is only about $400 million. Eric smiled and said, wipe your mouth. You're almost drooling. It's useless to be envious. You were the one who willingly sold the copyright of the Victoria's Secret show to me, so the money is mine. While Chris, Virginia, and the others laughed, Emily curled her lips and said, this wasn't my decision in the first place. The ones who should be regretting it the most are the people on the board of directors. During the last regular meeting, those fellows wanted me to take back the copyright of the Victoria's Secret show. Although Emily's tone was very casual, after saying this, she looked at Eric with some hope in her eyes. Chapter 679. The LTD Group was acquired by Firefly Investment Company and the Brighton family through a hostile takeover. Although the two jointly held 62% of the shares and had absolute control, when Eric threw out the $20 million marketing plan to produce the Victoria's Secret show, it was immediately met with strong opposition from the other shareholders on the LTD board. In order to avoid another internal turmoil within the LTD Group, which had just completed a hostile takeover deal, Eric took the initiative to take over the matter. Even taking into account the possible reaction of the minority shareholders of Firefly, the production cost of the Victoria's Secret show was fully funded by Eric himself. From the establishment of the fashion show to the final television broadcast, the sensational effect it produced proved that the fashion show was a huge success. However, before the release of the Victoria's Secret show, no one thought that the fashion show itself had the potential to generate profits. Even though the high ratings after the Victoria's Secret show attracted a large number of TV stations who tried to buy the broadcasting rights, In order to expand the influence of the Victoria's Secret brand as much as possible, Eric's asking price for the broadcasting rights was very low. Some small European TV stations even bought the broadcasting rights for the Victoria's Secret show for only $100,000. In the end, the total revenue from this was only about $10 million, which was still not enough to recover the $20 million production cost. However, after the release of the Victoria's Secret show video, an unexpected situation occurred. The beautiful fashion lingerie, the collectible value of the videotapes of the show itself, the 6 songs that could hit the top of any music chart, and the thirsty marketing effect of repeatedly selling out of stock caused the popularity of the Victoria's Secret fashion show to far exceed everyone's expectations. Just in the United States alone, the sales of the Victoria's Secret fashion show could reach 20 million boxes, and the sales prospects in the vast overseas market were even more unpredictable. With the hot sales of the Victoria's Secret show video, just the sales of the video in the United States alone could bring Eric $300 million. Even if Eric's current net worth had reached tens of billions of US dollars, this money was an unexpected windfall for him. While everyone was amazed by the sales of the Victoria's Secret show video, the most regretful ones were the shareholders of Ltd who had strongly opposed the production of the Victoria's Secret show. It was estimated that those people could not help but have the urge to bang their heads against the wall when they heard the sales figures of the Victoria's Secret show video. If it weren't for their strong opposition, the income from the Victoria's Secret fashion show would have belonged to Ltd. This income could almost double Ltd's annual profit. What was more serious was that Ltd would definitely not be able to get a share of the rich profits brought by the Victoria's Secret fashion show this year. However, because they had sold the copyright of the Victoria's Secret fashion show to Firefly, Ltd would also not be able to share in the profits of any future Victoria's Secret fashion show. Therefore, Emily's attempt to take back the copyright of the Victoria's Secret show was not surprising. Although both parties were very close, Emily was still a member of the Brighton family. Business was business. If they could take back the copyright of the Victoria's Secret show, the Brighton family would also benefit in the future. In fact, from the beginning, Eric's plan was to produce a Victoria's Secret fashion show on his own, and let Ltd see the advertising effects. Then he would return the so-called copyright to Ltd and continue to operate it himself. He never thought that the Victoria's Secret fashion show would bring him such an unexpected windfall. But now, just like Emily's business, since the Victoria's Secret fashion show had achieved unexpected commercial success, Eric could no longer carry out his original plan. However, Eric also knew very well that the unexpected success of the Victoria's Secret fashion show could only happen once in a while, because this year's success was achieved after Eric had spared no effort to mobilize the media resources of the entire Firefly Group and Yahoo's online media. He had also personally carried out the operation for half a year to achieve the final result. However, Eric could not continue to spend countless media resources to do this in the future. Even if he wanted to, the Victoria's Secret fashion show would lose its novelty and mystery, and the audience would not continue to buy it. At the same time, the format of the Victoria's Secret fashion show was very simple. It was not like the Super Bowl or the Oscar award ceremony, which could bring enough suspense to the audience every year. Therefore, this kind of success was completely impossible to replicate. Therefore, although the Victoria's Secret fashion show would definitely bring in some profits in the next few years, due to the successful operation of the first edition, it could not be maintained for too long. Therefore, letting go of the copyright of the Victoria's Secret fashion show now was almost equivalent to selling a stock at its highest point. After thinking for a moment, Eric said to Emily, "If I'm willing to return the copyright of the Victoria's Secret fashion show, what kind of price can Ltd offer?" "Huh." Emily suddenly widened her eyes and looked at Eric in disbelief. She seemed to want to confirm if she had heard wrongly. Even Chris, Joanna, and the others looked at Eric in surprise. Although someone had proposed to take back the copyright of the Victoria's Secret fashion show at the last board meeting of Ltd, Emily was also quite tempted. Otherwise, she would not have tested Eric just now. However, when she heard Eric say that he was willing to let go of the copyright of the Victoria's Secret fashion show, Emily still felt a sense of disbelief because, like many people, she did not have any expectations in her heart at all. However, she was only surprised for a moment. Emily recovered and asked to confirm. Eric, is what you just said true? Eric shrugged. Of course, but if the price offered by Ltd is not sincere enough, I will definitely not agree. Well, we really haven't considered this situation. Emily smiled awkwardly and said honestly, I need to go back and discuss it with the other shareholders. However, Eric, you. Emily said and gestured randomly. How much do you want to be satisfied? Eric said. I'm not short of money now. If you pay in cash, I still have to pay income tax. It's not worth it, so the copyright of the Victoria's Secret fashion show can be considered an equity investment. Hearing that Eric wanted to convert the copyright of the Victoria's Secret fashion show into Ltd's equity, Emily immediately showed a pitiful expression. Eric, Ltd sold the copyright to you at a symbolic price. Don't you feel embarrassed to ask for such a high price? Besides, you've already made so much money this time. Eric spread his hands and smiled. If it weren't for the unexpected income from the distribution of the video, I would have lost $20 million this time. Moreover, I also used up so much media resources from Firefly Group and Yahoo Portal. So, I can take this money with a clear conscience. Now that I've turned a yellow bean into a golden bean. Of course you have to buy it back at the price of gold, haha. When Emily heard Eric say this, she stopped making meaningless gestures and talked about business seriously. Then, if Ltd takes back the copyright, will you personally participate in the production of the Victoria's Secret fashion show? Eric shook his head. This kind of participation is definitely impossible this year, but I'm also a major shareholder of Ltd. If I have any good ideas, I definitely won't be stingy. Moreover, this year's Victoria's Secret fashion show had a very good start, so even if I don't participate next year, you'll definitely be able to pull in a heavyweight creative team. Just like the background song of the show, you can work with some top musicians next year. With the current influence of the Victoria's Secret fashion show, those singers will definitely be very willing to use the show as a platform for the release of new songs. Although a part of the revenue from the video will be shared by these singers, Ltd's revenue will definitely be equally generous. Also, don't forget that the most fundamental function of the Victoria's Secret fashion show is to promote the Victoria's Secret brand. The direct revenue from the show itself will definitely gradually decline, but the Victoria's Secret brand will continue to strengthen over the years and maintain a very strong position in its own field. Emily kept nodding. After listening to Eric, she joked, Eric, I kind of want to get you to be the operations director of Ltd now. Everyone laughed. Eric also smiled and joked, then you definitely can't afford it. In the next few days, Ltd almost couldn't wait to come up with a proposal. In the end, the two sides reached a deal worth $225 million in equity. Eric was very satisfied with this offer. Originally, Firefly Investment and the Brighton family had an equal share of 62% of the shares. However, after this transaction, Firefly Investment's share had increased to 35%, becoming the largest shareholder of Ltd. The Brighton family's share had decreased slightly to 30%. Although many industry analysts were very keen to point out that the commercial success of the Victoria's Secret fashion show this year could not be replicated, the market's reaction was often very blind. Otherwise, there would not be a stock market bubble. Therefore, the conclusion of this deal once again stimulated Ltd's share price, causing Ltd's market value to break through the high level of $5 billion. However, this was something that happened a while later. After the Victoria's Secret fashion show was broadcast on TV, Eric's energy once again turned to Hollywood. With the arrival of Christmas, Firefly's Face Off and Columbia's Game of the Brave were released one after another. Because Game of the Brave involved a lot of special effects, the special effects of the original version were obviously a bit rough. Of course, Eric did not want to repeat the same mistake, so he gave them a very generous budget. In the end, the production of the new version of Game of the Brave was much better than the original version, but at the same time, the budget rose steadily. In the end, it reached a high of $80 million, and $40 million was spent on marketing. In comparison, the final investment budget of Face/Off was only $60 million, and the marketing budget was much lower than that of Game of the Brave. However, after the two movies were released, there were some unexpected changes. Face/Off was released a week before Game of the Brave, and the box office for the first week was $36 million. At the same time, its exciting plot was unanimously praised by film critics, and the final box office could reach $120 million. Although the results were not as eye-catching as Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the film could recoup its production costs in the North American market alone. Through the overseas market, it could realize a profit in the box office, and the follow-up peripheral publicity would basically be a net profit. Then, Game of the Brave was released. This special effects blockbuster that Columbia had high hopes for also had a box office of $36 million in the first week. That's right, it was almost the same as Face/Off, and Columbia's initial box office forecast was that the film should have a box office of $45 million in the first week. The difference between reality and expectations was obviously huge. Moreover, compared to the good reviews of Face/Off, Game of the Brave did not have a good reputation among film critics. Many film critics said that the film was too noisy, and that the director was too obsessed with the CG special effects. The CG special effects film market was not saturated yet, and many audiences were not affected by the bad reviews of Game of the Brave. In the second week, the box office for this special effects blockbuster only dropped by 26%, and the total box office of $62 million in 2 weeks was already very good. But according to the box office forecast, the final domestic box office of Game of the Brave was likely to stop at $140 million, which was $60 million lower than Columbia's estimated domestic box office of $200 million. After the $1 billion write-down incident, Sony already had a lot of resentment towards Hollywood. Although the box office of Game of the Brave was still able to squeeze into the top 10 box office of the year, and through various distribution channels, this film also had a very good profit potential, but the box office did not meet expectations, which was an indisputable fact. At the same time, because of the repeated setbacks in selecting the next leader of Columbia, Barry Diller, Amy Pascal, Michael Lynn, and other well-known Hollywood managers all rejected Columbia's recruitment. Sony felt that the whole of Hollywood was bullying them, and in the end, they could not help but throw a tantrum. The first thing that Sony did was to harden the negotiations with Firefly's Men in Black and Mr. and Mrs. Smith. They even publicly announced that if Firefly continued to deliberately delay the development of the sequels, Columbia would not hesitate to use legal means to protect their interests. Eric did not intend to make things difficult for Sony in the development of these sequels. He still hoped that Sony would continue to stay in Hollywood and contribute to the development of the film industry. However, Sony obviously did not think this way. As for Eric's struggle with the salary of the main producer of Men in Black, Sony had always believed that Firefly wanted to monopolize the copyright of Men in Black. Therefore, in a situation where the negotiations were fruitless, Sony instructed Columbia's temporary management to do something else. They requested to renegotiate the distribution contracts with Flower Pictures for Night at the Museum, Forrest Gump, and even the Mission Impossible series. Chapter 680. The negotiations between Firefly and Columbia for the development of sequels to Men in Black and other films were personally handled by Katzenberg. With Katzenberg's tough character, Eric was not worried that Firefly would suffer in the negotiations. As for Columbia's so-called threat of prosecution, it was even less worth mentioning in Firefly's view. Once Columbia filed a lawsuit, the lawsuit would take a year or two to settle. Firefly could afford to wait, but Columbia dared not to. However, since Columbia was interested in Flower Pictures, Eric had to deal with it personally. Therefore, just after the New Year in New York, Eric returned to Los Angeles. Although Flower Pictures had no equity relationship with Firefly on the surface, it was a very important step in Eric's Hollywood expansion plan. The whole of Hollywood was actually very clear about the inside story of Flower Pictures. After all, the 7 major film companies basically monopolized the distribution channels. Without the support of the 7 major film companies, no new Hollywood player dared to make a film with an investment of more than $50 million. Otherwise, they would definitely lose all their money in the distribution process. However, the seemingly inconspicuous Flower Pictures did so. Not only did it produce 2 super big films with an investment of about $80 million, but it also got a share clause from Columbia that made many second- and third-tier film companies envious. This was absolutely inseparable from the support of Firefly Group. The biggest reason why Flower Pictures dared to do so was that if the big investment film it produced could not get a reasonable distribution contract from the other 6 major film companies, Firefly could take over at any time. This was also the reason why Columbia chose to launch an attack on Flower Pictures after the new year. Flower Pictures currently had 2 films to be released, Wonderful Night at the Museum and Forrest Gump. Columbia originally set the schedule for the 2 films to be released in the summer of 1995, but now it was the beginning of 1995. The release plans of the 7 major film companies for the summer had basically been determined, especially Firefly. This summer's Jurassic Park 2, Day of Independence, and Toy Story 2 were all heavyweight films that required a lot of publicity resources. Once the negotiations between Columbia and Flower Pictures on the share contract collapsed, although Firefly could take over the 2 films from Flower Pictures, it would be impossible to spare enough resources to release the 2 films. The other major film companies might have the ability, but Flower Pictures would definitely not have an advantage in the share agreement. Then, in the end, the 2 films were likely to be delayed. The production cost of Wonderful Night at the Museum was $80 million, and the production cost of Forrest Gump was $50 million. If the film could not be released on time, the total investment of $130 million could not be realized in time, and the follow-up plan of Flower Pictures could not be carried out. This kind of domino effect would be a huge blow to Flower Pictures. In Los Angeles, Venice Beach, not far from Firefly Studios, in the office of Flower Pictures headquarters, Amy Pascal worriedly told Eric about the recent events. The reason given by Columbia is that the box office of Game of the Brave did not meet expectations, and the style of Wonderful Night at the Museum is very similar to Game of the Brave. If they follow the original agreement, Columbia said that not only will they not get a profit, but they will also face a loss. Therefore, they want to change the established agreement and increase Columbia's North American distribution share from 15% to 20%. At the same time, they also want to participate in the distribution of videotapes and TV broadcast rights. Thinking about it carefully, the story style of Game of the Brave and Wonderful Night at the Museum were indeed very similar. Both films had a lot of animals, giant beasts, and exotic plants. Even the special effects of both films were done by the same team under Digital Domain. However, the box office of Game of the Brave did not meet expectations, but it was not a problem of the film's quality. Although the reviews were not good, as a commercial giant that focused on CG special effects, the reviews had little impact on the box office. The main reason why the box office of Game of the Brave did not meet expectations was that the competition for the release schedule was too intense. Compared to the potential cooperation of the 7 major film studios during the summer to avoid internal friction, the competition for the Christmas slot in 1994 could only be described as fierce. On December 23, in addition to Game of the Brave, there were also Street Fighter, Little Women, and Love, which had a screen cap of more than $1,500, released at the same time. Relatively speaking, there were only 3 films released at the same time as Face/Off, the previous week. A large number of new films released at the same time pushed the total box office of the 23rd to 29th to $188 million, which was the highest weekly box office of the end of 1994. However, in this week, there were 8 films that had box office of more than $10 million. Under such intense competition, Game of the Brave was still able to earn $36 million. The box office of the next week was only a slight 26% drop when the box office of the new films in the Christmas slot dropped. The box office performance could be said to be very good. If Game of the Brave had been released during the summer, when the competition was relatively relaxed, it definitely had the potential to hit $200 million. The reason why it did not meet the box office expectations was that it was born at the wrong time. Eric believed that Columbia definitely wouldn't be able to see this. Using the excuse that the box office of Game of Bravehearts didn't meet expectations to try to renegotiate the sharing terms with Flowers Pictures was a bit shameless. After thinking for a moment, Eric looked up and asked, "What about Forrest Gump? What's their excuse?" Columbia thinks that Forrest Gump is more suitable as an Olympic film. Its box office potential is limited, so Columbia has been somewhat uninterested in the release of this film from the beginning. After Amy Pascal finished speaking, she looked at Eric and said, "Actually, Eric, I think so too. Forrest Gump is a very good film, there is no doubt about that. However, its inspirational and nostalgic film style seems to be more suitable for the end-of-the-year slot. The main audience for the summer slot is still young people. Therefore, what we should do now is to ensure the release of Wonderful Night at the Museum. If Forrest Gump is delayed to the end of the year, it may be a good thing for it to hit the Oscars next year. This film's American culture is too strong. Without the halo of an Oscar, the income from overseas distribution will definitely be very limited." Eric listened to Amy Pascal's analysis patiently. As a strong woman who could be the head of a big Hollywood film company in his previous life, Amy Pascal's personal ability was definitely very good. Her analysis of the commercial position of Forrest Gump was also very accurate. However, just like the famous chocolate saying in Forrest Gump, no one knew what kind of box office potential it would show before it was released. Fortunately, Eric happened to know, so he just nodded slightly and did not agree with Amy Pascal's analysis. Looking at the little girl who was sitting quietly by the side, it was rare for her to not act coquettishly or act cute, and patiently listen to their conversation in a serious manner. Eric asked without hesitation, "Drew, what do you think we should do?" When Drew heard Eric's question, he thought for a while and said, "This depends on what you think. Columbia is doing this to force Firefly to develop the sequels of Men in Black and Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Oh, now they must also include the sequel of Brave Game. If Firefly didn't get stuck on this issue, Columbia definitely wouldn't be entangled with Flower Pictures on the contract. After all, without these two films, Columbia will definitely not be able to find suitable films to fill the slot. They will also miss this year's summer slot. This is a lose-lose situation." Eric nodded and smiled. Actually, in the eyes of Hollywood, Sony is like a rich nouveau riche who wants to pretend to be cultured. This kind of character who is willing to spend money, but does not have a big impact on the game rules in the circle will only benefit us. If the player behind Columbia is someone else, maybe we will not be able to do anything to them. So, I do not intend to force Sony out of Hollywood by restricting the copyright of those films too much." Amy Pascal showed a relaxed smile, and the little girl also spread out her hands. "Then what do we have to worry about? Just do as usual." Eric looked at their reactions and shook his head with a smile. He said, "You guys are too unambitious." From this incident, it can be seen that even your closest allies are sometimes unreliable. The reason why Columbia dared to do this is that even if Firefly wants to take over Flower Pictures, it will be difficult for them to do so in a short period of time. So Flowers Pictures will have to rely on themselves in the end. Amy Pascal was a little surprised. "Eric, are you saying that we should release these two films ourselves?" "Of course not. You can only do this slowly. The most important thing is that Columbia should learn a lesson. The other major film companies in Hollywood should also understand this. If you do not have enough confidence, don't fall out with your partners." Drew shook his head. "Eric, we're all confused by what you're saying." Eric looked at his watch and turned to look at the TV in the office. "It should be about time. Do you have CNN here?" Amy Pascal nodded. She found the remote control and turned on the TV to find the CNN news channel. The scene happened to be cut from a piece of news about the auction of mobile telecommunications licenses. The host held a press release in his hand and said to the camera, "Latest news at 10:15 p.m. Jeffrey Katzenberg, CEO of Firefly Group, and Howard Stringer, president of Sony's American branch, jointly held a press conference at the Columbia headquarters in Culver City. They announced that both parties will start the production of the sequels to Men in Black and Game of the Brave this year. Let's watch the live report from our correspondent in Los Angeles. The three of them stared at the TV screen. After a while, Drew said, "Eric, this is too sudden. If we had known, Amy and I would not have to worry about the release of Night at the Museum and Forrest Gump." The little girl's voice pulled Eric out of his thoughts. He did not immediately respond to Drew's words. Instead, he picked up his phone and dialed a number. After the call was connected, he said to the other end of the phone, "Kelly, I just saw the news about the mobile communications license auction on CNN. Find out what is going on. I want to see the details tomorrow." After a few simple words, Eric hung up the phone. He did not explain his actions just now. He continued the previous topic and said, "The reason why I asked Katzenberg to confirm this matter as soon as possible is to let some people understand that the next move of Flower Pictures has nothing to do with the copyright disputes of Men in Black and other films." Amy Pascal asked, "Eric, you mean you don't want us to cooperate with Columbia?" Eric nodded and said, "Now that the dispute between Firefly and Columbia has been resolved, Flower Pictures will no longer be affected by the copyright dispute between Firefly and Columbia. If you look for a new distributor, there will be no risk of being taken advantage of. My plan is that the distribution of Night at the Museum will be transferred to MGM. I will personally communicate with Frank Marcheso about this. The distribution terms will be the same as Columbia's. MGM only has 007 in the summer, so there will be no pressure at all to release Night at the Museum. The overseas and peripheral operations of Forrest Gump will be handled by Firefly, and the domestic distribution will be handled by you. It will be a kind of training. Forrest Gump is more inclined to be an anti-Olympic indie film, so the distribution pressure will not be too great. The box office trend is more likely to be a long-term trend. You just need to get more than 1,500 canvases for the premiere." Amy Pascal listened to Eric's words and frowned slightly. She was a little hesitant. To put it bluntly, the distribution of a Hollywood movie was actually just a few steps. First of all, you needed to contact a cinema that was willing to show your movie. This was undoubtedly an innate advantage for the 7 major film companies. For the 7 major film companies, some promising movies often had signed distribution contracts with many cinemas as soon as the project was launched. They could even get a lot of advance money from the cinema companies. At the same time, this was also an important threshold that blocked most of the new players who wanted to enter Hollywood. Of the 7 major distributors, the cinema associations would take the initiative to seek cooperation. But if it was a brand new film company that wanted to distribute a film, they could forget about paying an advance fee or signing a distribution contract in advance. Even if they completed the production of the film, the cinema associations would not be very enthusiastic about screening the film. In the end, most independent films would not even have the chance to be released. This was because this involved the second key step of film distribution, marketing. The movie of the same quality, the same release scale, and the same schedule, the box office of the 7 major film distributors was often much higher than that of the second and third-tier film companies. The main difference was marketing. The 7 major film companies had a mature film marketing system. In recent years, the further integration of the media industry had made the overall media strength of the 7 major film companies far more than that of the second and third-tier film companies. Because the marketing of the movie was completed by the film distributor, therefore, under the situation where media resources were gradually gathered in the 7 giants, the cinema companies would even rather distribute mediocre quality movies produced by the 7 major film companies than to distribute excellent movies of small film companies. This was because the powerful marketing strength of the 7 major film companies could often make a mediocre quality movie far surpass the excellent movies of small film companies in the box office. However, although Flower Pictures was a Hollywood newcomer on the surface, the key problems that these newcomers might face were not a problem for Flower Pictures. Amy Pascal started from a small staff member of an independent production company more than 10 years ago, and finally reached the position of vice president of Columbia. She was very clear about any key points of film distribution. She did not even need the help of Firefly. She could get enough theaters for Forrest Gump through her own connections. At this time, with the support of Firefly, the largest media group in the United States, the film's marketing problem was easily solved. Therefore, it was not difficult for Amy Pascal to handle the distribution of Forrest Gump in North America. But at this time, she just felt that it was not necessary at all. Right? Wasn't it better to leave the distribution to Sony or MGM? As Eric said, MGM only had one 007 movie during the summer. It was not difficult to add another, Night at the Museum, to the distribution. Then, adding another Forrest Gump, with a different style was also not a problem. Even if MGM could not handle 2 movies, they still had a few other big films. Without worrying about the distribution, the time saved by Flower Pictures was enough to prepare another new movie. Eric, of course, knew what Amy Pascal was thinking at this time. Other than teaching Sony a lesson, he also wanted to keep as much profit from Forrest Gump for his own people. In the original space-time, the box office of Forrest Gump in North America was $330 million. If it was handed over to any company to distribute, at least 15% of the distribution fee would be divided. This money was almost $50 million. More than 90% of Hollywood's movies squeezed out the last trace of profit, but it was not necessarily $50 million of income for the producers. Looking at Amy's expression, Eric smiled and said, "Actually, this is my personal suggestion. You and Drew can think about it. If you really do not want to go through so much trouble, then forget it. Just transfer the distribution contract to MGM." After hearing what Eric said, Amy Pascal made up her mind and said, "Eric, I will listen to you. I believe you are thinking about Flower Pictures." After the two reached an agreement, the little girl giggled and came over to hold Eric's arm. Although she would never have any objections to Eric's decision, the little girl also knew that if she listened to Eric's every word and had no opinions of her own, it would definitely hurt Amy Pascal's feelings. Flower Pictures couldn't do without this manager now. Chapter 681. After discussing the release of the 2 films, it was already close to noon. The 3 of them were planning to go out for lunch. As soon as they walked out of the meeting room, Eric met Tina Fey, who he had not seen for a long time. After Flower Pictures left Firefly, Tina Fey moved from being Drew's assistant to the management of Flower Pictures. She was responsible for the script review of Flower Pictures. After her job was settled, Eric rarely saw Tina Fey beside his little girl. Although both of them had a few intimate moments, Eric did not intend to keep Tina Fey by his side for a long time. However, since they met, Eric invited Tina Fey to have a meal together. There was a good restaurant near Flower Pictures' office building. The few of them sat down and ordered lunch. Eric smiled at Tina Fey, who was a little reserved. "Tina, are you still writing the script recently?" Tina Fey did not expect to see Eric suddenly today. They had not been in contact for a long time. Some of the feelings she had for Eric had faded a lot. She just felt that this man was becoming more and more dazzling, and was getting further and further away from her. At this moment, when she heard Eric still talking to her in the casual and familiar tone, Tina Fey's reserve in her heart dissipated a little. She said, "I have some ideas, but I've been too busy recently. I don't have much time to write them down." Drew suddenly said, "Tina, didn't you tell me last time that you had an idea adapted from your high school life? Tell Eric and see what he thinks." When Eric heard this, he smiled and looked up. However, he thought of the Mean Girls written by Tina Fey. However, he also knew that Mean Girls was adapted by Tina Fey from a novel called The Queen Bee and the Lackey. At this moment, he was a little curious about what kind of high school script Tina Fey would come up with. Seeing that Eric, Drew, and Amy were all looking at her with great interest, Tina Fey smiled embarrassedly and said, "Actually, I was a very annoying girl when I was in high school. I was a little crazy and always dressed like a tomboy. However, I was actually very envious of girls who could dress themselves up beautifully. This idea is roughly a story of a girl's transformation." In Eric's opinion, Tina Fey's script idea had a lot of similarities with Mean Girls. It was a story about a rustic high school girl who tried her best to turn herself from an ugly duckling into a swan in order to adapt to a new living environment, and to make the boy she liked notice her. It was still inseparable from the elements of friendship, love, and trust between teenagers. In fact, such a coincidence was not difficult to understand. A scriptwriter's script style must be closely related to a person's personality, life experience, and other factors. Although the original Mean Girls script was changed from a novel, as the scriptwriter, Tina Fey must have added a lot of personal stuff into it. Since there were so many similarities between the two stories, Eric said, "Tina, take some time to write this story down. I'll take a look at it for you when the time comes. Maybe we can make it into a movie." Since there was a complete image of Mean Girls in his memory, Eric could obtain the original author's information from the subtitles. As long as he checked the relevant information to make sure there would not be any copyright infringement, Eric could ask the scriptwriter to transform Tina Fey's script into the original Mean Girls script. Tina Fey's eyes lit up when she heard Eric's words. With Eric's current status, since he asked her to write the script, the possibility of this script being made into a movie was close to 100%. Amy Pascal, who was sitting next to them, also had a slight change in expression. She said with a smile, "Eric, Tina is now a member of Flowers Pictures. You can't poach her in front of me and Drew, right?" Eric shook his head and said with a smile, "That's true. Speaking of which, Tina's script is quite suitable for you guys to operate. After Mission Impossible, Flowers Pictures will definitely have sufficient cash flow. It's time to increase the production scale." Amy Pascal's words just now were actually a joke. If Eric had his eyes on a script, any other company could compete with Firefly. However, Flowers Pictures would definitely not do that. After all, Eric had given Flowers Pictures enough high-quality copyrights. Therefore, Amy Pascal was a little surprised when she heard that Eric had taken the initiative to push Tina Fey's script to Flowers Pictures so quickly. Eric watched the change in Amy Pascal's expression and explained, "It's actually like this. Firefly is currently planning to gradually streamline the production business. We plan to reduce the annual production to about 15 films in the next few years. Therefore, we may not have too much energy to estimate the development of this kind of youth campus comedy." This time, Amy and the other two were a little surprised. After the merger with Disney, the number of movies produced and released by Firefly in recent years had been maintained at the scale of 25 to 30. Now that it was suddenly reduced to 15, it was almost a reduction in production by half. If it were major film companies like MGM or Columbia that were not doing so well announcing a reduction in production, no one would be surprised. However, Firefly Group had been in the limelight in recent years. It was too surprising for them to suddenly announce a reduction in production. Amy Pascal was stunned for a few seconds. She still asked in disbelief, "Eric, are you sure you're not joking?" "Of course not," Eric nodded and said seriously. "This is the result of careful discussion by the company's management, because we found that the effect of the strategy of large-scale film distribution every year was not so obvious. Instead, it was an excessive waste of the group's internal resources." Take last year as an example. As of the end of last year, Disney Studios, Disney Animation, Firefly Pictures, New Line Cinema, Touchstone Pictures, Pixar Animation, Black Ant Productions, and some films imported through external channels, released a total of 29 films. The cumulative box office for the year was $1.55 billion, accounting for 25.8% of the total box office of $6 billion in North America in 1994. As they were talking, the waiter served the dinner they ordered. Eric had to pause his narration. Amy Pascal was amazed by the series of numbers that Eric casually reported. Unknowingly, Firefly's box office market share had accounted for a quarter of the total box office in North America. If this continued, Firefly might really recreate the situation of MGM during the golden age of Hollywood. This made her even more confused as to why Firefly suddenly decided to reduce production in such a good situation. After the waiter left, Eric continued, "Although this market share is very high on the surface, Firefly has already started to lose money on many films. Firefly's total box office revenue in North America this year was $1.55 billion, but just the 5 films, Saving Private Ryan, True Lies, The Lion King, The Runaway Bride, and Face/Off, accounted for $750 million, which was almost half of the total box office. If the scope was expanded, in addition to these 5 films, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles sequel, The King of Fighters, and other medium-sized productions had box office receipts ranging from $50 million to $90 million. The cumulative total of Firefly's top 10 films for the year reached $1 billion, accounting for 70% of the total box office share. And the profit brought by these 10 films accounted for more than 85% of the total box office profit. Next, the remaining 19 films only brought in $450 million of box office revenue for Firefly. The average box office revenue of each film is only $23 million, and the average production and distribution cost of these 19 films is $27 million. Although these 19 films can still bring some profit to Firefly through overseas distribution and videotape operations, the overall investment and output is very not cost-effective. After listening to Eric, Amy Pascal nodded as if she understood something. She said to Eric, "According to your analysis, Firefly's action of compressing the film production plan is definitely very wise. However, Eric, if Firefly does this, they may lose the first place in the box office market in the future. If it were other film companies, I don't think they would be willing to take the initiative to give up the first place in the market share." Eric smiled and said, "Fighting for the first place in the box office revenue is not very meaningful, and it is easy to be hated by others. Firefly pursues the first place in net profit." Firefly is now a comprehensive media group. Our future development focus in the film business is to produce more excellent films, and at the same time, we will put more resources and energy into the development of value-added businesses around films, so that every excellent film can maximize the benefits of the whole industry chain. In fact, Eric's decision was also the result of a detailed consideration of Disney's development strategy. In the original space-time, after the new century, the number of films produced by Disney each year was not high compared to other film studios. However, because of the use of the premium strategy, they could almost rush out a few box office dark horses every year. Therefore, although the number of films produced by Disney was only more than 10, with the excellent operation of the whole industry chain, Disney's profits had always been among the top of several major film studios. After a while, Amy Pascal asked again, "But Eric, don't you think the risk is also very high? If the production scale is reduced to half, Firefly may miss some box office dark horses. Moreover, if some of the key projects fail, Firefly's annual financial data will definitely be very ugly." Eric said, "The box office dark horses with low production costs and high box office take up less than 1% of the Hollywood films that land in the cinema every year. This slim probability is not enough for Firefly to maintain a high-load distribution strategy. As for the possible failure of big projects, this risk still exists even if we don't reduce production. But now, the failure of 1 or 2 big productions won't have much impact on Firefly. Firefly is not a listed company, and we don't have to rack our brains to prepare beautiful financial reports for investors. We can completely run the company according to our own ideas." Amy Pascal nodded with some envy. However, Tina Fey suddenly said, "Hey, did you guys notice that the box office dark horses in recent years seem to be from Firefly?" When Tina Fey said this, the 3 women suddenly realized that this was actually the case. From the beginning of Home Alone, to Pretty Woman, to the peak of Jurassic Park, and last year's Lion King during the summer, ever since Eric's sudden rise, all the box office dark horses in Hollywood seem to have grown legs and gathered under Firefly. Looking at the curious and suspicious gazes of the few women, Eric spread his hands and smiled. "This is my personal talent. If you guys really want a reason, have you watched Men in Black?" Hee hee. Tina Fey could not help but laugh. She poked the little girl next to her who was also overjoyed. She even reached out and made a tentacle on her head and asked, "Drew, what's the color of Eric's blood? Is it sky blue?" The girl picked up the napkin and wiped her mouth with a naughty expression. Then she lowered her voice mysteriously. "It's white. I've tasted it before, and it's a little salty." "Ugh. Cough cough." Tina Fey was stunned for half a second. Her face was instantly covered with a layer of red. She reached out and pinched the girl's ribs. Amy Pascal showed a puzzled expression, but she quickly covered her mouth and chuckled. Eric, on the other hand, could not help but spit out a mouthful of red wine. Fortunately, he immediately turned his head and walked around the table. However, because he held back that breath, he choked and coughed continuously. Looking at the little girl holding the napkin and approaching him with a weak expression, Eric was not at all confused by the little girl's expression. He unceremoniously knocked her head and said, "You're not allowed to make this kind of joke in the future. Remember, I'll never tell anyone that you're a Pandoran. Don't play dumb, you know that's not what I'm talking about." "Aha." The waiter quickly came over and hurriedly cleared the table. However, the few of them were no longer in the mood to continue eating. They paid the bill and left the restaurant. Just like the Twilight series in the original Spacetime and Lionsgate's, the Hunger Games series, for second and third tier film companies, a blockbuster film series could often make them rise. Although it was just a simple production company, a Mission Impossible, with an estimated global box office of $500 million could continuously bring hundreds of millions of US dollars of cash flow to Flower Pictures. Flower Pictures' early launch of Mission Impossible, Night at the Museum, and Forrest Gump still needed to rely on cooperation with other film companies or external financing. However, after Mission Impossible, even if it took some time for cash to flow back, Flower Pictures did not have any pressure in terms of funding. In this case, expansion was almost imperative. Other than the idea of the youth school film that Tina Fey came up with at the last minute during lunch, Eric studied some of the scripts that Flower Pictures had recently collected with Drew, Amy, and the others that afternoon. The superheroes' copyrights that Flower Pictures had helped Eric to recover had been returned to Marvel Entertainment. The other copyrights for The Lord of the Rings, The Bourne Identity, and other copyrights had not reached the time to be developed yet. Therefore, if they wanted to develop new projects, they could only choose by themselves for the time being. However, good scripts were indeed hard to come by. The few of them surrounded the pile of scripts sent by the script manager and studied them for an entire afternoon. They did not find any that were outstanding enough, nor did they find any that were familiar in Eric's memory. After work, Eric did not return to Malibu, because he had to go to Burbank early in the morning to attend the high-level meeting of Firefly. Instead, he planned to spend the night at the little girl's mansion in Beverly Hills. The twins drove the car onto the road, and the little girl, who was sitting in the back seat with Eric, laid on Eric's body softly. "I'm so tired, Eric. It's so troublesome to pick a script. You might as well write a few for us." Eric pinched the face of the girl who was resting on his lap and smiled. "Do you really think I'm from Pandora?" Drew turned his baby face and looked up at Eric. "You wrote so many scripts in the past." Eric explained. "It's different now. I don't have so much time to think about scripts." After being together for so long, the little girl could naturally tell that Eric was not being sincere. However, she had no intention of getting to the bottom of it. She believed that Eric must have had a reason to lie to her. Eric looked at the little girl in his arms with sparkling eyes and smiled. He did not say anything else. However, he was thinking about what Tina Fey said in the afternoon. The box office dark horses in the past few years have all come from Firefly. This casual remark made Eric wary because Tina Fey's words were not accurate. To be more precise, the box office dark horses in the past few years had all come from Eric himself, whether it was the ones he personally picked or the ones he personally wrote. The memory of his rebirth was Eric's greatest wealth, and also his greatest secret. This was a society where the strong preyed on the weak. Eric would not feel guilty for taking out the scripts in his memory and claiming them as his own. However, he did not want this situation to continue, and people would really think that he was an alien or something. Moreover, now that he had wealth and power, he did not have to do everything by himself. As long as the excellent films in his memory reappeared according to the historical trajectory, Firefly would have enough power to take these projects. Those copyright owners would definitely be more inclined to cooperate with a powerful company like Firefly. The car had unknowingly driven into the narrow mountain road of Beverly Hills. The slight bump pulled Eric back to reality from his thoughts. Looking at the little girl who had already closed her eyes in his arms, Eric smiled and reached out to touch the girl's eyelashes. Her bright eyes immediately opened. You haven't had dinner yet, and you're already sleepy? Drew rubbed her little head against Eric's body and said in a sweet voice, I just want to sleep in your arms. Oh right, I just remembered. Regarding the sequel of Mission Impossible, have you contacted Kevin Costner? Yes, he wants $20 million and 20% of the North American box office. Eric did a simple calculation in his mind. If the sequel could achieve the results of the first film, Kevin Costner would probably take about $60 million from this project. This was really an exorbitant demand. In his memory, although Tom Cruise took more than $70 million from Mission Impossible, he had participated in the production and investment. And then, Eric asked again. The little girl tugged at the corner of Eric's shirt and said, What else is there? We'll give him 20%, and the distributor will take 15%. We'll only be left with 20%. The local box office is the fastest way for a movie to get back its funds. We're not those big movie companies that can slowly recover their funds through long-term operations. How can we give this share to him? That's why we broke off the moment we met. He should be shooting future Waterworld in Hawaii now. Hee, I just heard that the shooting of that film didn't go well. The set they chose was too stormy. A set of more than $5 million was destroyed by a big wave, and then it had to be rebuilt. Now the budget has been exceeded by a lot. The inertia of history was really powerful. Eric's lips curled into a smile. Perhaps the film with the largest budget before Titanic would be born on schedule. Patting the little girl's excited face, Eric said, Then let's put this matter aside for the time being. If future Waterworld fails, together with last year's Enforcer, Kevin Costner will be saddled with 2 films that will make the investors lose a lot of money. It can't be done more than 3 times. When the time comes, he will definitely take the initiative to contact you. The little girl, who was leaning on Eric, giggled and snorted a few times, as if she was hatching some bad ideas. The car soon entered the Beverly Rosedale estate, and after a while, it stopped outside Drew's mansion. The little girl had just sat up when the twins sitting in the front passenger seat turned their heads and pointed outside the door of the mansion, saying, Boss, look. Eric and the little girl looked over together. The sun had already set, and in the dim light, a girl in a white windbreaker and jeans stood quietly in the open space outside the mansion's gate with a backpack on her back. The girl's figure was very petite, and it was obvious that she had not grown up yet. Seeing the car stop, the girl hesitated for a moment before carefully walking over. Eric was a little puzzled. Why would Christina Aguilera appear at the gate of Drew's house? He opened the car door and looked at the little girl inquiringly, but the little girl just shook her head. When she saw Drew getting out of the car, all of Christina's hesitation disappeared. She ran over excitedly, and when she noticed Eric getting out of the car from the other side, her face was filled with joy. Although her footsteps paused when she saw Eric, Christina quickly walked over to the little girl and said excitedly, Drew, I thought you wouldn't come back today. The little girl hugged Christina passionately. Although the little girl was not tall, Christina looked even more petite. After a while, the little girl let go of the girl and smiled. It's been a long time. Why did you come to see me all of a sudden? Christina was about to speak when she saw Eric walking over. She quickly turned around and greeted him obediently, Mr. Williams, hello. Eric just smiled and nodded, looking at Drew. Christina also turned her attention to the little girl, and said with a little sadness in her voice, Drew, I am here to say goodbye. Chapter 682. When the little girl heard Christina's words, she said in surprise and regret, Goodbye. What's wrong? Christina glanced at Eric and said, The Mickey Mouse Club has been disbanded. Mom plans to bring me back to Pennsylvania to attend high school. Oh, that's too bad. The little girl hugged Christina again. After letting go of the girl, she held Christina's little hand and said, You can come and play with me anytime when you're in Los Angeles. Well, it's too late now. I'll get Natasha to send you home. Christina was immediately stunned. She had been waiting in front of the little girl's house for many days. It was not easy for her to finally see the little girl. She did not even have the chance to say anything before she was asked to leave. When she saw one of the identical twins open the car door after hearing Drew's words, Christina was at a loss. She looked around frantically and looked at Eric pitifully. Since the merger with ABC, Firefly had been adjusting its TV business. However, for trivial matters such as the axing of some low-rated TV programs, unless Eric specifically requested, the relevant documents were often sent to his assistant's office to be classified and archived. After all, Firefly's TV business system had dozens of new programs eliminated every year. If he had not suddenly seen Christina, Eric would not have cared about these things. Seeing the girl who was about to be rudely chased away by the little girl looking at him pitifully, Eric shook his head helplessly. Although it was a little unreasonable for the little girl to do this, Eric knew that she was trying to protect him. However, Eric did not feel that some things needed to be overly cautious. He reached out and gently knocked the little girl's head. He smiled and said, "Stop joking around. Let Christina stay for dinner." "Well, okay. The little girl rubbed her head and pouted unhappily. She got into the car and instructed the twins to open the door and drive the car in. Eric did not get into the car again. He waved at Christina, who was at a loss, and walked into the mansion with the little girl. 2 years ago, after the Jackson case broke out, Christina felt that Drew's attitude toward them had suddenly turned cold. Before that, Drew would often invite them to his house to play, and occasionally bring them to some interesting parties. However, after that incident, all of that suddenly disappeared. Drew did not contact them again. Christina would occasionally bring Brittany to visit with her, but Drew's attitude toward them was no longer as warm. As for Eric, whom Christina had always wanted to see, she had not seen him even once after that incident. Christina originally did not have much hope in maintaining her relationship with Drew. However, the sudden disbandment of the Mickey Mouse Club forced her to take the initiative to look for Drew, hoping to get some help from him. Drew's whereabouts were a little erratic. Christina had been waiting outside Drew's mansion in Trousdale Manor for more than a week. Fortunately, she finally saw him, and she was even luckier to bump into Eric. Following beside Eric, Christina did not know what to say as she glanced at the man's silhouette from the corner of her eyes. She could only carefully look at the scenery of the mansion that she had not set foot in for a long time. She could not help but fantasize about when she could own a house like this. "You want to stay in Los Angeles?" The sudden voice startled Christina, but she quickly calmed down. She looked up at Eric and nodded honestly. "Yes, I don't want to go back to Pennsylvania to study. I like singing." Eric looked at the hopeful little face and said, "But you're still too young. You're not even 15 yet, right?" A hint of sadness flashed in Christina's eyes. She knew that her age was the biggest limitation she encountered now, but the girl still tried her best to defend herself. "Mr. Williams, I could sing Mariah Carey's Vision of Love when I was 10 years old. Back then, they said that I could sing as well as she could." Although Eric had never heard of Vision of Love, he knew that Mariah Carey was famous for her difficult dolphin voice. However, he also knew that the young girl in front of him could sing as well as Mariah Carey. "Christina, it's useless to have good singing skills. You're still underage. There won't be any record companies that will sign you." Christina's face suddenly turned gloomy. She could not help but think that it would be great if the Mickey Mouse Club could continue for another 2 years. When she turned 16, it would be easier for her to get a contract with some record companies. Christina turned to look at Eric, but she did not say what was on her mind. She knew that it would be useless even if she said it. The two of them walked to the door of the villa. Eric pushed the door open and let the girl in. The twins were already busy in the kitchen. The little girl's coat was hanging on the clothes rack. It seemed that she had gone to take a shower. Eric took a box of juice from the fridge and handed it to Christina, who was sitting on the sofa. He asked, "Justina, are Brittany and the rest still in Los Angeles?" Christina shook her head. "I'm not too sure. The boys and girls in the Mickey Mouse Club had always been two distinct groups. The relationship between the girls was not that good. After the show stopped recording, they did not have much contact with each other." Eric sat down on the sofa and grunted when he heard this, but he was thinking about the matter at hand. Although the European and American music scene had always been in a state of blooming flowers, every period had its own genre. From the mid-90s to the early years of the new century, The most eye-catching genre in the European and American music scene was teen pop. The main representatives of this genre were the famous Backstreet Boys and Britney Spears. Christina also walked the teen pop route in the early stages of her career. Justin Timberlake also joined the teen pop group in the beginning. Now, Firefly Group had just completed the integration of its music resources and formed Firefly Records. However, with the advent of the internet era, the decline of the recording industry caused by the spread of online music was close at hand. Firefly Records was destined to never reach the heights of Warner Records, Universal Records, and Columbia Records. Under such circumstances, it was obviously not worth it for Firefly Records to spend a lot of resources on every genre of music like the traditional record industry giants. The best way out was to focus on packaging and cultivating a certain type of singer. And in the last decade before the decline of the recording industry, the most popular genre of music would undoubtedly be teen pop. In his memory, Disney's recording industry had always been lukewarm. Britney, Christina, Justin Timberlake, and even Vanessa Hudgens, Miley Cyrus, Selena Gomez, and others who debuted from the Disney Channel were all recruited by other major record companies. This was undoubtedly a big loss for Disney. After all, the reason why these people could become famous so quickly was inseparable from the Disney Channel's cultivation. Christina saw that Eric was deep in thought, and did not dare to take the initiative to disturb him. She sipped the juice in her hand. After a while, Eric raised his head and said to Christina, "How about this, Christina? You stay in Los Angeles for the time being. Someone will contact you when the time comes." Christina looked at Eric in surprise. "Mr. Williams, you mean I can continue to sing?" Eric smiled and nodded. "Of course, but you definitely won't be able to release a record in the next few years. I'll get someone to arrange some suitable opportunities for you to appear in movies or TV series to maintain your popularity." In English, you and you were the same word. Of course, Christina could not tell that Eric used the plural. She thought that this was completely preferential treatment from Eric. The girl was overjoyed and pursed her lips. She raised her head and carefully looked around. She mustered up the courage to get up and move closer to Eric. Her face was slightly red as she whispered, "Mr. Williams, I can stay tonight. I just need to call Mom and tell her that I'm staying over at Drew's place." Eric raised his eyebrows and smiled. "What do you plan to do?" Christina's face turned even redder, but she mustered up the courage to look at Eric boldly and said, "I'll do whatever you want me to do." Eric smiled and reached out to pinch the girl's face. "Don't let your imagination run wild. I'm not interested in a little girl like you." Christina subconsciously shrank back and said, "You're lying. You obviously like me very much." "Oh, you. When you were with Drew, she was even younger than me." Eric raised his chin towards Christina's back and smiled. "You're mistaken. I was forced to do it." Christina blinked in confusion and realized something. She quickly turned her head and happened to see the little girl in a bathrobe looking at her with a smile. After dinner, Eric instructed Natasha to drive Christina back. Watching the car drive out of the mansion's gate, the little girl standing beside Eric took the few cassettes of songs that Christina gave to Eric before she left. She weighed them in her hands and said, "Eric, you have to be careful. The Chandler family extorted more than $20 million from Jackson. Now, the family is living in a mansion in Manhattan. They don't have to work for the rest of their lives. I think if someone extorts you once, their children and grandchildren won't have to worry about food and clothing for the next few generations. My money isn't that easy to extort. Besides, there are so many things like this in the industry. How many people can expose it? In the past few years, the only case that got blown up was Jackson, and he was wrongly accused." Eric smiled, but there was a hint of sarcasm in his expression. Christina originally wanted to ask Drew to help pass some of the song samples she recorded to some of the record company's executives. After getting a promise from Eric, the girl left a few cassettes behind before she left. Back in the mansion, Eric casually stuffed a cassette into the player. Christina's cover of Foo was immediately heard. Compared to the original version and the Victoria's Secret show version in his memory, the girl's singing was even more shocking. The little girl hugged a pillow and went to Eric, who was typing on his laptop. She said, Christina's singing is really good, but I think it's hard for her to find her own niche. She's more suitable for the development of high-pitched female singers like Whitney Houston and Mariah Carey, but she's too short. The little girl was obviously just saying it casually, but she hit the nail on the head. In his memory, although height had nothing to do with Christina's height, it was true that she had never found a suitable development path for her music. At first she was on the teen pop path. Although her first album sold more than 10 million copies, Britney's strong rise and Christina's consecutive teen pop failures made her try to change her style. After that, she never found a suitable niche. However, Eric pointed at the song Foo that was playing from the radio and said, "Isn't this Kristen's musical style?" Eric had already decided to let Britney and Christina walk on the original teen pop path. However, compared to Britney's sweet girl next door image, Christina could walk on the path of a slightly rebellious independent girl in order to distinguish herself from Britney. Since a lot of boy groups could exist in the original space-time at the same time, as long as they were separated, it wouldn't be a problem to accommodate two teen pop queens with different styles at the same time. After spending a few hours organizing the information and ideas about teen pop in his memory, Eric sent them to the work email in his assistant's office. He told Kelly to add the topic to tomorrow's regular meeting. Then, he turned off his laptop and picked up the little girl who was sleeping soundly beside him to rest. The next day, at the regular meeting of the executives, after discussing in detail the topic of gradually reducing the scale of Firefly's film production in the next few years, Eric raised the question of the development direction of Firefly Records. After the original ABC and Disney's music resources were integrated, Firefly Records was in a critical period of development. The songs released by Eric during the Victoria's Secret show were amazingly successful, and it was easy for the management to accept Eric's suggestion to make full use of Firefly's advantages to take the lead in packaging a batch of teen pop singers. The meeting finally decided on two crucial plans for the future of Firefly Records. One was to recall the group of kids from the Mickey Mouse Club to evaluate and nurture their potential. The other was to issue an acquisition invitation to an inconspicuous subsidiary company under Sony Music, Jive Records. Strictly speaking, Jive Records was only a subsidiary of RCA, a subsidiary of Sony BMG Records. In the huge Sony music system, Jive was very inconspicuous at the moment. However, Eric knew that in the next 10 years, the most popular teen pop singers such as Backstreet Boys, Britney Spears, Justin Timberlake, and other singers were all from Jive. This didn't mean that Jive had any magical powers, but it was because the management team of this record company was very good at packaging teen idols and singers. They even privately proposed the company's operating slogan, "Carry on with the idols to the end." Chapter 683. After a morning meeting, he had lunch with Katzenberg and discussed some trivial matters. It was not until the afternoon that Eric finally had time to learn about the mobile telecommunications operating license auction that he saw on CNN yesterday. Every country had its own radio regulations. Whether it was television media or mobile telecommunications, they all relied on radio transmission. Just like how different television stations had different radio frequencies, different telecommunications operators were also limited to operating within a certain radio frequency range. American television stations or telecommunications operators were authorized to operate within the corresponding radio frequency range from the FCC, Federal Communications Commission. These were the so-called licenses. In Eric's office at Firefly headquarters, Kelly, who was sitting on the other side of the desk, looked at Eric, who was carefully reading the basic information. Kelly, who was sitting on the other side of the desk, explained softly, "In the 80s, the wireless spectrum resources for mobile telecommunications were all applied by the operators to the FCC, and then they were allocated by the FCC. However, in recent years, the mobile telecommunications industry has been rapidly rising with the support of digital technology. Most of the spectrum resources that the operators used to obtain from the FCC are no longer enough. With the huge increase in the number of applications for spectrum licenses, the Clinton administration realized that this was a good time to generate revenue. Therefore, the spectrum resources needed by the telecom operators were divided into 3 different classes of licenses. A, B, and C for auction. What you saw on CNN yesterday was the auction of A and B licenses, mainly for traditional telecommunications operators. These two classes of licenses brought a total of $3.75 billion to the Ministry of Finance. Eric raised his head and asked, "What about C tiers?" Kelly said, "According to the plan given by the Clinton administration, the C-tier licenses were mainly auctioned to the emerging telecommunications operators to support the small and medium-sized enterprises in the early stages of entrepreneurship. However, the auction of the C-tier licenses was scheduled for 3 months later." Eric pondered for a moment and understood the crux of the matter. He laughed sarcastically. It was true that all crows in the world were equally black. In his previous life, Eric noticed that Unicom publicly complained that they were late in obtaining the licenses, and thus missed the 4G deployment period. The situation in his memory was too similar to the current situation. The only difference was that one was a political game, and the other was purely an economic game. Currently, it was a critical period for the American mobile communication industry to upgrade from analog signals to digital signals. The traditional telecom operators already had a strong advantage. After getting the license and gaining a 3-month head start, the gap was once again widened. Those emerging telecom operators who had gotten a C-tier license could only dream of catching up. Eric could imagine that even if they got a C-tier license, the relevant small and medium-sized enterprises would only be swallowed up by the established telecom giants when the time came. Noticing the expression on Eric's face, Kelly could also guess what he was thinking. She smiled and said, "You must have guessed that the FCC did this because of the influence of the established telecommunications operators like AT&T and Sprint. However, there's something even more outrageous next." Eric was puzzled and asked, "What?" Kelly flipped through the thick folder on the table and found a document. She passed it to Eric and said, "Look, this is the FCC's detailed bidding document for the Spectrum license auction. Turn to page 12, I've drawn a red line." Eric flipped to the page that Kelly mentioned and saw a paragraph marked with a red line. C-tier licenses will be auctioned separately in order to give more opportunities to minorities, women, township operators, and small enterprises to obtain a more level playing field. Eric read it a few times and did not find anything wrong with it. He raised his head curiously and asked, "What's wrong with this paragraph?" Kelly smiled and said, "You wouldn't have guessed it, right? Right after the auction ended yesterday, someone made an issue out of this sentence. About 6 small enterprises that submitted their applications for C-tier licenses filed a lawsuit in the federal court at the same time. They claimed that the FCC's description of race and gender in the bidding document violated the United States Constitution's provisions on national equality and was suspected of discrimination. They requested the FCC to amend it and apologize for the offensive words." Eric was really shocked this time. He did not know that this was possible. After being reborn for so many years, Eric had some understanding of the United States legal rules. Since someone had filed a lawsuit, this matter was definitely not something that could be settled by the FCC simply amending the bidding document. Everyone had to gather their lawyers and study the United States Constitution together to see if this paragraph was really unconstitutional. The Constitution was so thick that it would take at least a month or 2 to go through it. This was the so-called evidence collection stage. After the evidence was collected, both parties would have to argue in court. Even if the district court gave a verdict, if one party did not agree with the verdict and continued to appeal, then the lawsuit would continue. In the end, after all this trouble, it would probably take more than half a year for the lawsuit to end. The auction of C-tier licenses was 3 months later than the auction of A-tier and B-tier licenses. Now that there was a lawsuit, it was estimated that the so-called new telecom operators would have to wait until at least next year to get their licenses. Okay, let's not talk about this. Eric put the bidding document aside and gestured to the office that he was in. It was not luxurious but was still exquisite and grand. He smiled and said, "I think it's a bit wrong for us to be discussing these issues. I'm now a capitalist, the kind that has no conscience." Kelly was amused by Eric's words. Eric wasn't wrong. It was only because this incident happened in the telecommunications industry that they didn't have much to do with. That was why they felt it was unfair to see this situation. However, if something similar happened in Hollywood, the Big Seven would definitely not hesitate to unite and strangle the latecomers that might threaten their position in the cradle. So, Eric, are you planning to get involved in the mobile telecommunications industry? Yesterday, when he saw the news of the mobile operation license auction, Eric was indeed very tempted. Now was the beginning of the mobile telecommunications industry's explosion. Investing in the telecommunications industry would definitely bring rich returns. However, from the example of the C-tier license auction, it could be seen that the water was too deep. Before he figured out the situation, Eric did not want to risk getting involved. Shaking his head regretfully, Eric rubbed the folder in front of him and said, "Let's not think about this for now. By the way, Kelly, have you contacted Qualcomm?" "Oh, I was just about to tell you." Kelly took out the memo and flipped through a few pages. She handed a note to Eric and said, "Qualcomm's CEO, Owen Jacob, is very interested in our contact. However, he has been in Korea recently and will only be back next week. He called me and said that he will fly directly to Los Angeles when the time comes. He hopes to talk to you face to face. Here, this is Owen Jacob's phone number in Korea. He said that you can call him at any time." Eric took the note and looked at it. He smiled and said, "Qualcomm is so eager. This is not a good habit. Aren't they afraid of walking into the tiger's mouth?" Qualcomm is in a very bad situation now. So far, they have only won the opportunity to build a CDMA network in Korea. However, the telecommunications market in Korea is too small. It will not have much impact on the overall global communication technology standards. Moreover, a week before the spectrum license auction, AT&T just announced that it will build a GSM network nationwide. As the largest telecommunications operator in the Federation, the communication technology standards set by AT&T will definitely drive a group of followers. The technical maturity of GSM is much higher than that of CDMA. Once most operators switch to GSM, Qualcomm may even face bankruptcy. At this point, Kelly paused and said, "Firefly Investment will soon buy more than 1 million shares of Qualcomm shares. If this continues, Eric, once Qualcomm goes bankrupt, these shares will become worthless." Qualcomm's first IPO in 1992 issued a total of 6 million shares in circulation, accounting for 30% of the total share capital. Because of the rise of GSM, Qualcomm's development had lagged behind in recent years, so there was no further financing. At the moment, Qualcomm's stock price was only around $17, and its total market value was only $340 million. To be honest, if he could buy all of Qualcomm, Eric would not hesitate at all. After all, just the revenue from the Victoria's Secret show alone could bring him more than $300 million in income. The entire Firefly Group, because there was no large-scale expansion plan for the time being, relied on the profitability second to none in Hollywood. Firefly Group was now facing a very happy problem, which was that they had too much money. 1 million shares is only 17 million, Eric said to Kelly. "I plan to buy at least 3 million shares, so it will only cost $50 million. This investment is equivalent to a medium-sized production investment film. It doesn't matter even if it loses all of it." "Yeah, it really doesn't matter to you." Kelly also realized that she was a little worried. $50 million was indeed nothing for Eric's current net worth. While the two were discussing, Eric's mobile phone on his desk rang. After the call was connected, Elizabeth's voice came from the other side. Eric said a few words and hung up. Kelly also heard some information from the conversation between the two and asked, "Miss Murdoch?" "Yeah, about the Golden Globe Awards and the Oscars. Saving Private Ryan and Braveheart are up against each other. Liz asked me to talk about the public relations for the two film awards." Eric stood up and Kelly thoughtfully took his coat. Eric reached out and put it on. He looked at the female assistant who was gently helping him button up. Eric inexplicably had the illusion that a wife was sending her husband on a date with another woman. He reached out and hugged Kelly's waist, smiled and said, "It's so strange. Why do I suddenly feel a little guilty?" Kelly smiled and did not stop what she was doing. she said with a little feminine emotion. I just want to make you feel guilty. You can keep this to yourself. Don't tell anyone. Will it be troublesome for you if it gets out? Eric nodded vigorously. Very troublesome. After the popular New Year, the most important thing for Hollywood was undoubtedly to deal with the upcoming award season. Compared to last year's Oscars, this year's award season also did not have the so-called movie that everyone expected. Instead, there was a confrontation between Saving Private Ryan and Braveheart. Although the Oscar nominations had not yet been released, in the more important Golden Globe Awards nominations, the two films coincidentally received 5 nominations at the same time. Best Drama Film, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Screenplay, and Best Soundtrack. Mel Gibson's performance could only be regarded as average. Eric remembered that he did not receive a nomination for Best Actor in the original Spacetime. Now that there was such a nomination at the Golden Globe Awards, it should be the result of Wayne Stan's public relations. As early as more than a year ago, Eric and Elizabeth had a discussion about the strategy of these two films. However, plans could never keep up with changes. Many things still needed to be changed according to the current situation. Under Miramax's reasonable operation, Braveheart was undoubtedly more successful in the box office than the version in the original Spacetime that won an award but lost the box office. Braveheart began to be released on a small scale in early December last year, and continued to accumulate reputation and box office. During the Christmas period, Miramax increased the release to 2,000 theaters. With the advertising effect brought by the Golden Globe Award nomination, and the accumulation of reputation from long-term operations, the film earned more than $26 million in box office that week. It was just the first week after the new year, and the total box office of Braveheart was close to $60 million. With the continued hot topic of the award season, the box office of many year-end movies dropped significantly. However, the weekly box office of Braveheart remained firm and maintained a weak drop of about 20%. If this situation continued until the Oscars, the total box office of Braveheart was estimated to be about $120 million. With an Oscar, Braveheart was likely to be able to recoup all its costs through overseas distribution. Eric left the Firefly headquarters and went to an open-air restaurant in Beverly Hills that was frequented by Hollywood celebrities, according to the address given by Elizabeth. Although it was afternoon, there were still many guests leisurely drinking coffee and chatting casually in the restaurant. Some of them were familiar faces. Seeing the waiter leading Eric in, many guests stood up to greet Eric. After exchanging greetings and passing through the crowd, Eric saw Elizabeth and Harvey Weinstein on the restaurant's balcony. They sat down at the table and ordered a cup of coffee. Eric looked at the gentle slope covered with shrubs, the Beverly Hills mansion scattered like chess pieces in his field of vision, and the city of Los Angeles in the distance. He nodded and said, "The scenery here is really good. No wonder there are so many guests." Harvey Weinstein said with a smile, "Eric, if you like, you can come here often in the future. The owner of this restaurant is my friend. I will ask him to give you a free meal." Eric gestured to the eyes that were still glancing at them and joked, "A free meal is definitely not enough. If I come here often, your friend may have to pay me advertising fees or something." Elizabeth and Harvey both laughed. If Eric really came here often, the number of customers trying to get close to him in the restaurant would definitely increase exponentially. It would be more useful than a billboard. The three of them chatted casually for a while before the topic gradually turned to the awards season. P.S. The C-tier license in the United States was delayed for a year and a half before it was auctioned. After that, there was no more. Until now, the main operators in the United States are still AT&T and Sprint. This reminds me of the situation 2 years ago when we opened up virtual operation licenses to private capital. At that time, everyone was hoping that Alibaba would come out and make trouble for the 3 big mountains or something. However, after the licenses were issued, it seemed that there was no more after that. Now it seems that it is more realistic to hope that Mobile Connect would really speed up and reduce the fees a few times. Chapter 684. Not only did Saving Private Ryan and Braveheart coincidentally receive the same Golden Globe Award nomination, but the similarities between the two films could be found everywhere. They were both epic films, had the same profound theme, and had the same outstanding war scenes. Even the soundtrack of the film was composed by two of Hollywood's top musicians, John Williams and James Horner. Therefore, the popularity of the two films in the award season was almost equal. Recently, the supporters of Saving Private Ryan and Braveheart were also arguing fiercely in the media. If Firefly and Fox were just competitors, then this year's award season, both on the surface and in private, the two companies would be fighting fiercely for the most important film awards. This situation would undoubtedly lead to unnecessary expenditure on the public relations budget of both parties, and the final awards would not be in their best interests. However, because of the relationship between Eric and Elizabeth, the two parties had already formed a certain tacit understanding a long time ago. Eric, from the current situation, separating the Best Picture and Best Director awards is the most beneficial for both of us. Harvey Weinstein analyzed seriously. Saving Private Ryan is nearing the end of its global release, and the video of the film was released in North America 2 months ago. Therefore, I think the most suitable award for this film should be Best Director. Although this film is full of masculinity, Catherine is a woman. In the history of the Oscars, although there have been a few female directors who have been nominated, no woman has ever won Best Director. Therefore, if Saving Private Ryan wins Best Director, the sensation it will cause will be no less than that of Best Picture. After all, the Oscars already have 66 Best Picture nominees, but not one Best Female Director. In the next few decades, the Best Female Director award will only be Catherine. As long as Saving Private Ryan wins Best Director, this film will maintain a lasting influence for many years to come. Eric nodded. Although Harvey Weinstein did not mention anything related to the film's income, he was actually analyzing the pros and cons of the award from a business perspective. Once Catherine became the first woman to win the Academy Award for Best Director, Saving Private Ryan would have a very special place in the history of cinema. This meant that Saving Private Ryan would be unique until the second female Academy Award for Best Director appeared. Whenever someone thought of the Academy Award for Best Director, they would often quickly notice the only woman in it, and then they would also notice this film. This also meant that Saving Private Ryan would, for many years to come, bring Firefly profits through videocassettes, DVDs, and other peripheral channels far surpassing the profits of other films that won Best Director. Harvey Weinstein noticed Eric's approving look and continued. Braveheart is still in the screening stage, so the best film title is more important to us. If we do our own PR, with the strength of the two films, the final result will be difficult to predict. I personally think that the final result is likely to be the opposite of what we expect. This was because Saving Private Ryan was an American war film. Compared to Braveheart, which was about British history, Saving Private Ryan had a higher chance of winning the Best Film Award. In terms of Best Director, there are not many women in the Directors Association. Most of them are old men with a strong male bias. In this regard, Mel Gibson has a much higher chance of winning than Catherine. If we want the result to develop in the direction we want, after the Oscar nomination, we must reach some tacit understanding in advance. Although Braveheart, which was released at the end of the year, had the best timing compared to Saving Private Ryan, which had been out of North America for a long time, it could easily have the greatest media influence during the award season. However, if the Oscar potential of the two films was carefully analyzed, Saving Private Ryan had the two advantages of an American theme and extreme political correctness. If the two sides did their own things in terms of Oscar PR, the result was really unpredictable. After Harvey finished speaking, Eric nodded and said, "Harvey, I will call Katzenberg tonight and ask the person in charge of the Firefly Awards PR to contact you tomorrow. You can communicate in private." Harvey Weinstein appeared here because he wanted to hear the promise of cooperation from Eric. After all, the best win-win situation was for everyone to happily share the cake. Otherwise, the final result would either be the opposite of what both sides wanted, as Weinstein had just said, or one side would be completely defeated. This was definitely not what the two companies with a very good relationship wanted to see. After confirming the main problem, Harvey Weinstein also talked about some details in a relaxed manner. Eric, Ms. Bigelow is also the main producer of Saving Private Ryan. But I heard that she doesn't seem to have participated in too many public relations activities for the Golden Globe Awards recently. The Golden Globe Awards certainly don't matter, but if Saving Private Ryan wants to win the Oscar for Best Director, she should show up more. Even if she doesn't attend too many public relations parties in private, I think she should accept a few more public media interviews or something. The most important steps of public relations for awards included media publicity and private public relations with the judges. The ultimate goal was actually like an election, to pull votes from the judges through various influences. Weinstein's suggestion was, of course, very pertinent. Although Eric agreed very much, he still smiled and said, "Harvey, you may not know, but Catherine is a bit, well, she's kind of idealistic. She doesn't like this kind of activity very much, so I can't force her." Harvey Weinstein was stunned. If the operation was done properly, the post-production videotape and TV broadcast license of Saving Private Ryan could continue to bring in hundreds of millions of dollars of net income for Firefly. With such a big business, how could Firefly let the director do whatever she wanted just because of her idealism? However, Harvey quickly remembered some private rumors, and Catherine's beautiful face that had no traces of age at all appeared in his mind. He smiled knowingly and did not intend to mention this matter again. Elizabeth, who had been quietly listening to the two talking, suddenly muttered with jealousy, "She's already in her 40s and still idealistic. Does she think she's a little girl?" Eric almost choked on his coffee. He hurriedly placed the coffee cup carefully on the table and looked up to glare at Elizabeth, who was suddenly jealous. She glared back at him unceremoniously. Harvey Weinstein keenly sensed that the atmosphere was getting a little out of hand, so he tactfully got up and left. After getting a firm promise from Eric, the follow-up public relations details of the awards naturally did not require Eric's personal attention. Harvey would communicate with the relevant person in charge of Firefly. After getting up to send Harvey off, Eric and Elizabeth sat down again. When the two of them were alone, Elizabeth also realized that her temper just now was a little inappropriate, but she was unwilling to take the initiative to give in. She did not dare to look at Eric in the eyes. Instead, she looked into the distance, as if she was counting the number of mansions on the hillside. Eric waved his hand and asked the waiter to bring them a pot of coffee. He also followed Elizabeth's gaze and looked into the distance. After a moment of silence, Elizabeth suddenly became a little angry again. She stared at Eric and said, "Julia is right. You bastard, you don't know how to accommodate us at all." Eric felt a little puzzled. "Your Highness, what did I do wrong again? You should have taken the initiative to speak first. You actually need me to break the silence." Eric did not know whether to laugh or cry. "I thought you were thinking about life just now. I didn't disturb you. You're not a little girl. Why are you thinking about these things? Why can some people in their 40s still be a little girl, but I can't?" Eric could only surrender. "Okay, you continue to have a little girl's mentality. This way, you might be as beautiful as Catherine when you're her age." "Yes." Elizabeth suddenly felt a little proud. "When I'm 40 years old, you can imagine what she will look like." Eric could imagine it now because he had seen it before. More than 10 years later, Catherine would be no different from now. If this woman could live her entire life as a vixen, she would not have wasted her life in this world. Elizabeth noticed the smile on Eric's face when he was deep in thought. She pretended to shiver in disgust and said, "You're really imagining it, and you can still smile. You're so perverted. No wonder people say you have that complex." Eric did not intend to discuss Catherine with Elizabeth anymore. He took the initiative to change the topic. "I saw that Mel Gibson was nominated for Best Actor at the Golden Globe Awards. It's already a bit of a stretch for his acting to be nominated for the Golden Globe Awards. You're not planning to get him nominated for an Oscar, are you?" Eric and Harvey did not talk about the public relations issues of the Golden Globe Awards at all. This was mainly because the Golden Globe Awards did not seem to be important to Saving Private Ryan. The influence of the Golden Globe Awards usually only existed before and after the awards, and then it would quickly be overshadowed by the influence of the Oscars. For a movie that was released in theaters, the media attention of the Golden Globe Awards might have a positive effect on the box office. However, this kind of positive effect did not have much of an impact on a movie that had already entered the post-production stage. For Saving Private Ryan, the most important thing was still the Oscars. After all, when any news of Saving Private Ryan appeared in the media in the future, it would often be mentioned because of the Oscar title. When Saving Private Ryan sold overseas videotapes or television broadcast rights, the buyers would often only care about the Oscars. Most of the time, even if it was just an Oscar nomination, it was much more valuable than the Golden Globe Awards. This difference was even more obvious in the actor awards. For example, in the original Spacetime, Xiao Lizhi, who had been pursuing the Oscar for many years, many people did not even know that Xiao Lizhi had already won the Golden Globe Award 10 years before he got his wish. When Elizabeth heard Eric changing the topic, she cleverly did not continue to harp on it. She said, "Speaking of which, Mel Gibson even quarreled with Harvey because of this nomination." Chapter 685. Eric was puzzled. "Why?" Elizabeth said. "Didn't you just say it yourself?" With Mel Gibson's acting skills, it would be very difficult for him to even be nominated for a Golden Globe. Ever since the Golden Globe nominations were announced, the media has been debating this matter. Mel Gibson wants Best Director, and doesn't want a Best Actor nomination to affect his reputation. However, in order to increase the attention of Braveheart, Harvey still insisted on applying for Best Actor for him. Eric immediately understood. With such an outstanding film like Braveheart, its reputation had already been confirmed. Therefore, continuing to promote the film's reputation in the media would not affect the box office too much. At this time, stirring up some controversial topics to increase the popularity of the film could actually boost the box office. Mel Gibson's nomination for the Golden Globe Award for Best Actor was undoubtedly the so-called controversial topic that Weinstein had picked out. Many fans who were originally not very interested in Braveheart, after noticing the debate in the media, often bought tickets to enter the venue in order to find out what was going on. At the same time, Mike Mira had already confirmed that Mel Gibson would not receive the Best Director award. This kind of man-made controversy would not affect the established public relations strategy. In the original Spacetime, although the Weinstein brothers were known as the Oscar gods, in fact, it was more accurate to call them Oscar businessmen. This was because the most fundamental purpose of the two brothers operating the Oscar awards was for profit. As long as they could get more profit, the two brothers could not only win some PR awards for some films that were not necessarily good enough, but they could also use some means like now to ruin the nominations that were originally hopeful of winning an award. Eric knew that the Golden Globe was just an appetizer, so he asked, "Did you also apply for Mel Gibson's nomination for Best Actor?" Elizabeth nodded and said somewhat helplessly, "Mel Gibson disliked Harvey from the beginning. During the filming of Braveheart, he often complained that Harvey was too controlling. Joe Roth and I often had to personally mediate. When he heard that Harvey applied for Best Actor for Braveheart, he even scolded Harvey for being a greedy Jew to his face. Harvey was furious. We're all Australians, so we thought we'd have more opportunities to work together in the future. We've been trying to build a good relationship with Gibson, and Dad was the one who personally signed the contract for Braveheart. But after this, it will be difficult for us to work with him again. Mike Mira's performance this year has far exceeded our expectations when we acquired him. Between Gibson and the Weinstein brothers, we can only choose the latter. If they don't want to work with us, then so be it. If the film studio overindulges the big-name actors, they'll be the ones to suffer in the end. It's easy for you to say. Everyone is doing it. If we don't do it, we won't be able to get a good project. Fox isn't a firefly. You're just like a chef who runs a restaurant. Even if you can't hire a chef, you can do it yourself. You can even cook better food than the chef. But we can't do that." Eric smiled and said, "Your analogy is really apartment. You've been quite free lately. Why don't you come to Fox and cook a few dishes for us?" "Forget it. I can't even be bothered to enter my own kitchen now." I haven't heard any news about your next film after Jurassic Park. Are you planning to retire? Of course not. Didn't I just shoot a Victoria's Secret annual show? It's just that it didn't appear on the big screen. It was released on video. I heard that it sold well. Have you seen it? Elizabeth nodded with a smile. It may have sold 20 million units in North America. If it's a movie, it's likely to be at the top of the video sales chart this year. The songs in it are really nice. And those little beauties, TSK TSK. Hey, how many did you sleep with? Eric looked like he was reminiscing. With a satisfied expression, he said, Of course I didn't let any of them go. Every night, I changed to a different one. Occasionally, I even have a few one-on-ones. Sigh, a pervert like me. Before Eric could finish, Elizabeth picked up a nut chocolate from the dessert plate on the table and threw it at Eric. Eric dodged with a smile. When he saw the chocolate hit the railing and scattered on the edge of the balcony, he said with a pained expression, Throwing food around is really unethical. Elizabeth raised her chin. Bite me. While the two were bickering, they suddenly heard a few soft squeaks. They turned their heads and saw a furry squirrel poking its head out of the balcony for a moment. Then it carefully jumped up and picked up a piece of nut chocolate with its two front paws. It sniffed it and immediately ate it. Noticing that Eric and Elizabeth were looking at it, the little guy didn't run away, but it sped up its eating speed. Its cheeks were soon full. Although Beverly Hills was a residential area, the ecological protection was very good. There were all kinds of birds and small animals. This open-air restaurant built on a gentle slope was surrounded by fine shrubs. It was normal for these little things to be foraging for food. Not far away, the waiter noticed that Eric and Elizabeth's gazes were attracted by the squirrel on the balcony. Worried that these little things would upset the two big shots, he took the initiative to come over and chase the squirrel away. However, he was stopped by Eric with a wave of his hand. What are you thinking about? Elizabeth asked as she looked away from the squirrel because of Eric's gesture. Nothing. I gave the little guy a name. What do you think of Scott? Elizabeth's eyes darted between the squirrel and Eric a few times before she said with sparkling eyes, I was the one who lured this little guy here. Eric smiled as he picked up another piece of chocolate and threw it over. When he saw the frightened little guy shrink back, he quickly picked up the chocolate that was bigger than his head and ran away. Then he turned back to Elizabeth. Since you were the one who lured him here, come. Brainstorm and make up a random story for me to see. Elizabeth stared at the edge of the balcony where the squirrel had disappeared with interest for a while, and said intermittently, Squirrel, chocolate. Looking for food, winter, and humans. Eric smiled as he looked at Elizabeth, who was racking her brains. Unknowingly, a story idea similar to robbing the nut shop was almost formed. However, it was definitely 1,000 miles away from Ice Age. Elizabeth used 10 minutes to come up with a story and was a little proud. She wanted to ask Eric what idea he came up with, but an uninvited guest appeared in front of them. Howard Stringer had just taken over the affairs of Sony in the United States. Because of the mess in Colombia, he had been in a state of heavy workload recently. He looked a little tired, but at this moment, he still looked like an elegant scholar. Under the guidance of the waiter, he came to Eric and Elizabeth. Howard Stringer shook hands with Eric and Elizabeth and smiled. Eric, I'm sorry to be so presumptuous, but can I sit down? Of course, please sit down. Eric nodded. Since the other party had come looking for him, Eric would not be too unreasonable. He signaled the waiter to serve Howard Stringer a cup of coffee and asked, Howard, why are you looking for me? Eric had no intention of making small talk, so Howard Stringer did not beat around the bush. He said, It's like this, Eric. Columbia received a notice from Flower Pictures this morning that they intend to cancel the distribution contract for Night at the Museum and Forrest Gump. I think this is completely unnecessary, isn't it? Howard Stringer came looking for him directly, so Eric did not push the blame to Drew and Amy. He said, Columbia felt that the original distribution contract was unreasonable. Let's part on good terms. I don't think there's anything wrong with this. Howard Stringer's tone was still gentle as he said, Eric, it's just a very minor disagreement. There's no need to cancel the cooperation at all. After all, Columbia and Flower Pictures have a good cooperation on Mission Impossible. Howard, Columbia started this matter first. Flower Pictures does not have the ability to take risks like Columbia. After you raised objections to the contract, Flower Pictures has already started to prepare for a retreat. If we go back to Columbia now, Flower Pictures will lose trust with our new partner. We can't do that. Howard Stringer knew that Eric was talking nonsense. If Flower Pictures found a new partner, such as Fox or MGM, these two companies would have leaked the news to the media. After taking a sip of coffee, Howard Stringer suddenly changed the topic and said, "Eric, I just received news that Jive Records, a subsidiary of Sony Music, has just received an acquisition offer from Firefly. This should be true, right?" Chapter 686. Eric did not expect Firefly's management to be so decisive. They had just proposed this in the morning, and now they are attacking Jive Records in the afternoon. However, he wasn't too surprised. Jive Records had its glory days around 2000. Teen Pop hadn't risen yet, and Jive's market value was less than $10 million. Compared to the entire Firefly group, it wasn't worth mentioning. When Eric heard Howard Stringer using Jive Records as a bargaining chip, he smiled and said, "Howard, Katzenberg is indeed planning to acquire some potential record companies to expand Firefly Records. Since you said so, it must be true. But unless Firefly is going to acquire Sony Records, I will not interfere with these small matters. If you have any questions, you can call Katzenberg and the rest." Howard Stringer did not know that Eric was the one who ordered him to do this. When he heard what Eric said, he was a little hesitant. After receiving the news from Jive, Howard Stringer hurriedly asked someone to find information about this inconspicuous subsidiary company. He found that Jive Records had always been focused on black hip-hop music. Except for the industry gossip where they had the opportunity to sign Will Smith but unfortunately missed it, Jive Records had never cultivated any heavyweight black singers over the years. Perhaps it was because of their long-term inactivity in hip-hop that Jive Records management was recently trying to make a transition. Howard Stringer studied this company several times, but he could not find anything about Jive Records that attracted Firefly. Howard Stringer did not think that things were as simple as what Eric said. Howard Stringer looked at Eric, who was sitting opposite him, and decided to lay his cards on the table. He said, "Eric, how about this? Flower Pictures' distribution contract with Columbia will remain unchanged. In return, I can sell Jive Records to Firefly. Columbia was a mediocre subsidiary. If they lost Night at the Museum and Forrest Gump, it would be impossible for them to find 2 more films to fill their summer slots. Columbia's performance was terrible. If they could not even maintain their performance on the surface, Sony's film business would undoubtedly be under greater pressure from investors." However, Eric still shook his head casually and said, "Howard, I've said it before. I don't care about the acquisition of Jive Records. You don't have to use this as a bargaining chip. I'll say it again. Columbia was the one who started this. Since you're not willing to cooperate, we'll go our separate ways." Eric's stubbornness made Howard Stringer a little angry. He said, "Eric, the contract between Columbia and Flower Pictures hasn't been terminated yet. If Flower Pictures wants to forcefully terminate the distribution contract, Columbia won't rule out the opportunity to use litigation to protect its interests." Eric suddenly leaned forward with a dangerous look in his eyes. "Howard, listen to me. Don't do this. Otherwise, you will find that Columbia will face more trouble than Flower Pictures." Howard Stringer retorted, "Eric, Columbia already has enough trouble. If we have no other choice, we don't mind adding more trouble." And then? Eric continued Howard Stringer's words. Without waiting for the other party to speak, he continued, "Then, you will find that the business in Columbia will be even worse. You are from the media industry, and EA hired you to revive Sony's entertainment industry in the US. If you can't do this, you will not be valuable to Sony. When Columbia's business becomes worse, Sony will have to find another scapegoat. That scapegoat can only be you. But now you still have another choice. Tolerate this, and Columbia will only lose a summer slot. But the situation will not worsen. and Sony's higher-ups will be the ones to blame for losing the summer slot. So, Howard, what are you going to do? Howard Stringer leaned back in his chair, and his eyes flickered. He didn't say anything for a long time. Eric ignored him, and felt the setting sun on his body. He reached out and waved for the waiter not far away to ask for the menu. He discussed with Elizabeth in a low voice and ordered dinner. Then he handed the menu to the waiter and said to Howard Stringer, "So Howard, do you plan to stay for dinner?" Howard Stringer seemed to have been suddenly awakened. He shook his head slightly and did not say anything else. He got up and left. Eric only nodded, and did not get up to send Howard Stringer off. Instead, it was Elizabeth who looked at Howard Stringer's figure and said, "Eric, aren't you afraid of pushing him into a corner? Since he can climb to the position of CEO of Sony's US branch, he will not do anything rash. But he will realize that the position of CEO of Sony's US branch is not as good as he thought. He will be depressed for a while. Although Peter Guber was kicked out of Columbia, Columbia will continue to live under Firefly's shadow for the next few years because of Men in Black and other projects. Unless Howard Stringer decided to abandon his reliance on Firefly and develop his own film business on his own from now on. But the reality was, from Howard Stringer's memory of Columbia Pictures' performance after he took over Sony's American branch, it was clear that he did not have this talent. Columbia did not even have an outstanding manager. A few days later, Columbia accepted the termination of its distribution contract with Flower Pictures. Between fighting for the interests of Sony and protecting his own job, Howard Stringer obviously chose the latter. However, Firefly's acquisition of Jive Records had run into trouble. Sony Records had rejected Firefly's acquisition offer. However, Eric was not interested in Jive Records' signed singers or their music copyrights. Instead, he was interested in the management team of Jive Records, who created the peak of teen pop in his previous life. After the acquisition of Jive Records failed, Firefly turned to Jive Records' management team and promised Jive's CEO, Barry Weiss, the position of CEO of Firefly Records. Although Sony Records knew about this and paid more attention to Jive Records, Barry Weiss did not hesitate to choose between the CEO of Firefly Records and a subsidiary of Sony Records. Soon, Jive Records' management team left Sony Records and joined Firefly. Los Angeles International Airport. The turbulence of the landing woke Owen Jacobs up from his sleep. After more than 20 hours of flight, he was exhausted. After more than 3 years of operation, and even a large part of the technology rights, Qualcomm received the support of the Korean government on CDMA. But because of the strong rise of GSM and the widespread popularization in Asia, Korea began to waver. Owen Jacobs had to go to Korea personally to deal with this crisis. Thinking of Qualcomm's current situation in North America, Owen Jacobs could not help but feel a little confused. AT&T, the largest telecommunications operator in the U.S., had established the GSM system as the mobile communications standard, which directly caused a group of smaller telecommunications operators to follow AT&T's footsteps. Qualcomm was almost on the verge of life and death. If they could not win over CDMA supporters in the US as soon as possible, even if Qualcomm had more advanced technology, it would inevitably go bankrupt. And now, the meeting with the young man was a crucial opportunity for Qualcomm. Owen Jacobs walked out of the airport with his assistant. Standing in the bright eyes of Los Angeles, Owen Jacobs relaxed a little. He looked around in the crowd and soon saw Aaron Salmasai, one of Qualcomm's partners, greeting him. The two hugged, then Aaron Salmasai took Owen Jacobs and Owen Jacobs to a black car. He ordered Owen Jacobs' assistant to drive, and Aaron Salmasai took Owen Jacobs to sit in the back. As soon as he sat down in the car, Owen Jacobs couldn't wait to ask, "Aaron, have you contacted Eric Williams?" "Of course," Aaron Salmasai nodded and said. "Tomorrow at noon, Eric Williams invited us to have lunch together at the Malibu Point Manor." Owen Jacobs was a little anxious. "Tomorrow at noon, it's only 10 o'clock in the morning now. Why don't you make an appointment today?" Aaron Salmasai patted his old friend on the shoulder. "Hey Owen, relax a little. You have been flying for more than 20 hours. You have to take a break. You don't want to meet Eric Williams in this state, right? Also, we have to discuss the plan again. This may be our last chance. If we miss it, Our 10 years of hard work will likely be in vain." Owen Jacobs calmed down and nodded when he heard his friend say this. They drove all the way to a hotel in Santa Monica. Aaron Salmasai had already arranged a hotel room for Owen Jacobs and his assistant. After a simple wash, Owen Jacobs went to Aaron Salmasai's room. Aaron Salmasai asked Owen Jacobs to sit down on the sofa and turn to make coffee. As soon as Owen Jacobs sat down, he was attracted by a Fortune magazine on the coffee table, because the cover of the magazine was a photo of Eric on the movie set. Owen Jacobs picked up the magazine and found a bookmark in the magazine. He curiously flipped to the page, but it was an article introducing the Firefly Group. Owen Jacobs casually glanced at it and was quickly attracted by the content. Aaron Salmasai walked over and noticed Owen Jacobs' focused expression. He carefully put the filled coffee aside and quietly sat down on the other side of the sofa. At the beginning of a new year, countless media outlets were looking back at the past and looking forward to the future. For financial media outlets, every new year was the time for them to tabulate and rank the economic data of the previous year. And the Firefly Group, which frequently made various big moves last year, was undoubtedly the focus of the financial media in the UA. Although Firefly had not announced the fourth quarter of last year and the annual financial report, based on the data of the first 3 quarters, Fortune magazine estimated that Firefly Group's 1994 annual revenue was likely to reach US $18 billion, and the annual operating net profit would also be around US $1.5 billion. At the same time, Firefly had 2 major non-operating income last year, US $1.5 billion from the divestiture of paper assets and US $2.5 billion from the auction of Disney's animation department. With such strong profitability, Firefly had already surpassed Time Warner Group, which was ranked second in Hollywood, and had become a veritable media giant. Aaron Salmasai patiently waited for Owen Jacobs to finish reading the article and said, "Are you surprised?" Owen Jacobs nodded and said, "More than US $10 billion in cash reserves, US $2.5 billion in discretionary cash flow. It's hard to imagine that Hollywood can produce such a profitable company. Eric Williams is only 25 years old this year, right?" "Yes, but this young man simply appeared in this world to create miracles. Just like the Victoria's Secret annual show that was hyped by the media at the end of last year. In order to operate the Victoria's Secret brand, Eric Williams spent US $20 million on the luxury lingerie show in half a year. Originally, many people thought that the US $20 million expenditure could only be earned back through the appreciation of the Victoria's Secret brand and the profits from product sales. But after the Victoria's Secret show was released, the sales suddenly exploded. The US $29.9 per box of videotapes were expected to sell 20 million boxes. This alone could bring US $300 million in income to Eric Williams. Later, Eric Williams returned the copyright of the Victoria's Secret show to Ltd and received equity worth more than US $200 million, Aaron Salmasai said with some emotion. He obviously did a lot of preparation work and learned a lot about Eric. Owen Jacobs was also a little emotional. However, he was already 62 years old and had experienced many things. Although he was shocked, his emotions were not too agitated. The two finished a cup of coffee and talked about business. Aaron Salmasai handed the prepared materials to Owen Jacobs and said, "This is the detailed plan. You can take a look first." Owen Jacobs flipped through the materials in his hands. The FCC had just held a spectrum license auction for established telecommunications companies not long ago. For these established telecommunications companies that had already obtained A-tier and B-tier licenses, Qualcomm's influence was very weak. It could not influence which mobile communication technology these established telecommunications companies used. Therefore, Qualcomm had mainly focused on C-tier licenses from the beginning. Compared to the A-tier and B-tier licenses that were only available to a limited number of companies, the C-tier license auction that had countless bidders would undoubtedly be very competitive. In the future, those small and medium-sized telecommunications companies that had paid a high price to win the spectrum licenses would definitely pursue more economical and affordable mobile communication technology in their actual development. Compared to GSM technology, CDMA had a great advantage in network construction costs and spectrum utilization efficiency. At the beginning, Qualcomm's worst-case scenario was that once CDMA technology was abandoned by all the established telecommunications companies, Qualcomm would strive to obtain commercial opportunities from C-tier license holders. However, after Eric expressed his interest in Qualcomm, one of Qualcomm's partners, Aaron Salmasai, quickly came up with a very bold idea. They planned to get enough financial support from Eric, and then buy all the C-tier licenses in one go. Then, by bundling CDMA technology, these spectrum licenses would be wholesale to small and medium-sized telecommunications companies at a relatively low price. In this way, even if CDMA technology failed miserably in front of the mainstream telecommunications companies, CDMA technology could still occupy one-third of the mobile communication market with the promotion of C-tier licenses. Aaron Salmasai said, "I've already registered a company called NextWave. As long as I can pull in funds from Eric Williams, I'll let go of Qualcomm's affairs and focus on NextWave to prepare for all the C-tier licenses." Owen Jacob put down the proposal in his hand. Although Aaron Salmasai's tone was full of expectation, he knew very well that his old partner was just like him. In this matter, he actually had no confidence. Because of the private tacit understanding, the competition for A-tier and B-tier licenses was not intense. However, the FCC still auctioned a sky-high price of $3.75 billion. If they wanted to buy all the spectrum licenses in the auction process of C-tier licenses with a large number of competitors, they would need to prepare at least twice the premium compared to A-tier and B-tier licenses. This number was conservatively estimated to be $4 billion. After hesitating for a moment, Owen Jacob asked, "Aaron, how likely do you think Eric Williams will provide us with $4 billion of support? Don't forget, the entire Qualcomm is not even worth $400 million now. Supporting a company with a market value of less than $400 million to implement a $4 billion huge plan, in the eyes of most people, was something that only a lunatic would do." Although they had prepared a set of words that had been discussed repeatedly, in fact, whether it was Owen Jacob or Aaron Salmasai, they did not have any confidence in their hearts. The reason why they forced out such a somewhat unrealistic plan was entirely because Qualcomm was now at a dead end. Since Eric Williams took the initiative to contact us, then this time we will definitely be able to get some support from him. Perhaps Eric Williams can help us lobby a mainstream telecommunications operator to accept CDMA technology. As for this plan, Alan Salmasai comforted Owen Jacob, and at the same time he comforted himself. Then he looked at the plan that had been drafted, and a faint bitter smile appeared on his face. "As for this, if we try it, there might be a 1% chance of success. But if we don't try it, there will be nothing." Chapter 687. Los Angeles during the awards season could be said to be very lively. Unless they were filming and couldn't get away, most of the stars would gather in Hollywood during this period, either for the awards or to look for opportunities. All kinds of parties were held one after another. The stars were also enjoying the glory brought to them by their status after a busy year. However, the upcoming Golden Globe Awards were no longer attractive to Eric. He even knew the final results of some awards in advance. For example, The Lion King would win Best Picture in the musical comedy category, and for the follow-up Oscar Public Relations Strategy, Catherine would lose to Mel Gibson in the Golden Globe Award for Best Director. After all, even the Oscars with more than 6,000 judges had been affected by public relations factors, let alone the Golden Globe Awards with only more than 90 judges. Compared to the Golden Globe Awards, Eric was more concerned about the Super Bowl 29 finals that would be held at the end of the month. This year's Super Bowl finals happened to be broadcast live by ABC, which also had a certain symbolic meaning for the Firefly Group. Of course, the three films that Firefly was about to release in the summer, Jurassic Park 2, Independence Day, and Toy Story 2, also got the best Super Bowl broadcast advertising spots. The three summer lead films were basically completed. After the Super Bowl trailer, Firefly would conduct internal test screenings of these films, and make appropriate adjustments according to the audience's reaction. Then large-scale global distribution and publicity work would begin. Although he was not as busy with public relations activities as many of the film creators who were nominated for awards, Eric was also very busy recently. At the beginning of the new year, in addition to attending various important meetings, Eric also needed to personally participate in the development of Firefly's new film projects for the new year. After the hand-drawn animation department was auctioned off, after half a year of recruitment and training, the completely digital Disney animation department had begun to take shape. At the end of last year, a 6-minute 3D animation short film was completed, and the effect was very good. In addition to more than 200 trained digital animators, after coordinating with Pixar, Eric transferred a small team from Pixar, led by Peter Doggett, to Los Angeles to be in charge of Disney's animation department. Peter Doggett also came with an animation project that he had personally conceived, Monster Power Company. Although Pixar's most famous animation in the original spacetime was Toy Story, in Eric's opinion, Monster Electric Company was the work that brought Pixar's imagination to the extreme. The idea of the monster employees passing through the space-time gates to absorb energy by collecting children's screams was amazing. Moreover, at the end of the story, the transformation of the monsters from scaring children to bringing joy to the children was completely in line with Disney's core spirit of bringing joy to the world. Therefore, this work could almost be said to be tailor-made for the new Disney digital animation department. After Peter Doggett demonstrated the story of Monster Electric Company to the management of Firefly, all the executives present unanimously agreed to immediately start the project and gave the maximum support in terms of production time and project budget. The 2 live-action movies that Firefly Pictures had already finalized, Titanic and The Matrix, had also entered the substantial preparation stage. In the studio that Firefly Pictures had specially prepared for Titanic, Cameron, who had rested for half a year and had only started work after Eric's repeated urging, was talking about his plan. I have carefully surveyed the environment of Rosarito. Firefly can build a base dedicated to shooting Titanic there. The Mexican side has agreed to cooperate with our work. I also plan to completely replicate the Titanic. This process will take about 3 months. However, during these 3 months, the crew can also shoot the corresponding indoor scenes in the studio. Eric stood in front of the workbench that was covered with draft shots. Looking at the exquisite model of the Titanic in the middle of the workbench, he suddenly interrupted Cameron. "Jim, are you saying that you plan to make a complete copy of the Titanic?" Cameron eagerly explained, "Of course, Eric, although the cost will definitely be higher, I think this is the only way to achieve 100% authenticity. If we completely use a model or a green screen for shooting, the visual effects will definitely be greatly reduced." Eric recalled the information in his mind and took the Titanic model from the workbench. He gestured with his hands and said, "Jim, I definitely agree to build the real Titanic, but there is no need to completely replicate it. You see, the 2 sides of the ship are almost exactly the same. We can just build one side. This way we can save a lot of money, can it?" Cameron took the model and thought for a while with his chin in his hand. He was still a little hesitant. "Eric, this way, we can indeed save a lot of money, but if we use one side as both sides, a lot of props, especially props with characters and logos, will have to be completely reversed during shooting. The work of the post-production special effects will also increase a lot. Correspondingly, the production cycle will also be extended. Compared to building a complete model of the Titanic, copying a set of props with characters inverted would definitely be much cheaper, right? Jim, you should know in your heart how big the project you want to shoot is. The budget of $150 million is absolutely unprecedented. This is also the highest budget Firefly can afford, so we should save as much as we can." Although Cameron was still a little reluctant, Eric's reason made him unable to refute. He compromised and said, "Okay, Eric, we'll do as you say." As they were chatting, a staff member gently knocked on the open door. "Mr. Williams, Mr. Cameron, Miss Wazey's makeup is done. Would you like to take a look?" Eric nodded. "Of course, let her come in." Soon, Rachel Wazey walked in surrounded by a group of staff members. Everyone in the studio was almost immediately attracted by Rachel's outfit. The dark purple wide-brimmed hat set off Rachel's face, making her look a little petite. However, this did not hide the pride and stubbornness unique to an English lady as she lifted her chin slightly. The double-breasted lapel suit and dress set off Rachel's slender figure. Compared to the slightly bloated figure in his memory, she was many times stronger. The white gloves and the umbrella in her hand just so happened to add a bit of elegance to Rachel. Facing the scrutiny of everyone gathered on her, Rachel did not have stage fright at all. Instead, she took a few steps forward with a demure smile on her lips. She elegantly reached out to Cameron. "Hello, Mr. Director. I'm Rose Devine Burkett. Nice to meet you." The standard British Cockney accent woke Cameron up from his daze. He almost subconsciously took Rachel's hand and shook it gently. Then he reacted and turned his head excitedly to Eric. "That's right, Eric, this is my Rose," Eric said teasingly. "I told you, Jim, my taste in choosing the female lead is 100 times better than yours. I hope you don't develop this taste to choosing the male lead," Cameron retorted with a little mischievousness. His gaze turned to Rachel again. After the excitement just now, there was a little more pickiness in his eyes. He waved for the costume designer to come forward and said, "The style of this suit is very good. It's just that the white color is too monotonous. Are there any other colors?" The costume designer replied, "There's also a black and white striped suit. Mr. Cameron, do you want to try it on?" "Yes, I'll try it on later." Cameron nodded and walked around Rachel. Then he shook his head and said, "Umbrella, the umbrella is wrong too. I remember that in the information I saw." Cameron was still trying to recall when the costume designer took the initiative to explain. "Mr. Cameron, your taste is really sharp. Miss Rachel should have a wooden long-handled umbrella, but we can't find that style for the time being. We can only order it in the future. Write this down. Don't forget." Cameron nodded, took a step back, and rested his chin on his hand. Eric knew that Cameron wouldn't be able to finish it in a short time. His attention left Rachel Wazy, and he waved to the petite figure beside Rachel. Although most of the people around them were paying attention to Rachel, there were still people who noticed Eric's actions. Carolyn's face was slightly red. She smiled at Eric in a somewhat reserved manner, but she still walked over. "Good morning, Eric." Eric moved to the side and let Carolyn lean against the wide workbench with him. He smiled and asked, "It should be working hours now. Are you missing work?" "Of course not." Carolyn shrank her neck. She knew that Eric was joking with her, but she still looked at Kelly, who was standing not far away, seriously. She raised her small face and explained, "I asked for leave from Ms. Haynes. Rachel just arrived in Los Angeles yesterday, and she needs my help with a lot of things. But I can go back to work tomorrow." Eric shook his head and smiled. "There's no need to be so anxious. You two good sisters haven't seen each other for so long. You can accompany her around Los Angeles this week. You can come back to work next week." Carolyn waved her small hand and said, "It won't take so long. It's only Tuesday today." Eric patted Carolyn's shoulder and said, "Don't reject it. Just take it as a reward for your work. Kelly has been telling me that your work is outstanding, and she wants me to praise you properly." Carolyn nodded her small chin happily, but soon she asked with some uncertainty, "Really?" Eric nodded with certainty and smiled. "Really? I've seen the information on Qualcomm that you're in charge of. It's very detailed." Carolyn's face turned red, and her small head lowered subconsciously. After a while, she mustered the courage to raise her head and said, "Eric, Rachel said that she wants to take time to treat you to a meal. Thank you for helping her get this role. When? We know that you've been very busy recently. As long as you have time." Eric said, "Then I'll let you know when the time comes. Will Rachel be living with you?" "Yes, Rachel is living with Melanie and me for the time being. However, Rachel's agent is looking for a house for her. She said that it's not suitable for Rachel to live with us." Rachel's agency contract was directly signed under ICM through Eric's mediation. Hearing the rare little dissatisfaction in Carolyn's tone, Eric said, "If you feel that the agent is not doing well, call me at any time. I'll ask Kapoor to change her." "No, it's not like that." Carolyn quickly shook her head and said, "She's doing very well. I'm just a little regretful that I can't live with Rachel." Eric smiled and did not say anything. Carolyn had grown up with the meticulous care of her relatives and friends. She had a pure heart, and it was inevitable that she was a little too dependent on the people around her. After being criticized by Cameron, Rachel went up to greet Eric. Then, Cameron rushed her to change her model. Carolyn looked at Eric with some reluctance and followed him. Eric was about to continue discussing the preparation of the project with Cameron when Kelly walked over and said, "Eric, it's already 10 o'clock. You have an appointment with Qualcomm's Owen Jacobs and Aaron Salmasai at noon. Chris and Emily also called just now. They've already arrived at Sharp Corner Manor." Eric looked at his watch. It would take about an hour to rush back to Malibu from Praia Vista, and he still needed to prepare in advance. So he said goodbye to Cameron and left Firefly Cineplex. He brought Kelly back to Sharp Corner Manor. The chef was already preparing lunch, and the twins were helping in the kitchen. The little girl and Emily were sitting in the corner by the glass wall, laughing and talking about something. Chris, who was sitting on the sofa and reading a magazine, was the first to notice Eric and Kelly. He stood up and waved his hand. After walking through the hall to the glass wall, the little girl and Emily also came over. After greeting each other, Chris did not immediately talk to Eric about Qualcomm. Instead, he took out a thick package and handed it to Eric. "Eric, my father asked me to bring this to you." Eric took it curiously. He felt that there seemed to be a book inside. It was a little heavy. He asked, "What is it?" The few of them sat down on the sofa. The little girl stayed close to Eric and took out the things in the package without any hesitation. It was a thick stack of split-screen sketches. When Eric saw the first one from the little girl's hand, he raised his eyebrows slightly and took the stack of sketches. Although the strokes of the sketches were a little rough, it was obvious that a lot of effort had been put into each of them. Eric could still easily tell that the content of the first sketch was a person lying in a nutrition chamber with tubes inserted all over his body. He continued to flip through the sketches. For each of the subsequent sketches, he could find a familiar scene from a certain movie in his memory. Chris looked at Eric's serious expression and explained with a smile, "Didn't my father set up a film investment project to support young directors? Every month, the agent will hand over some scripts for him to choose from. I went back to Maryland to visit my father last week, and he just happened to receive this package. After reading the sketches, he asked me to bring it to you. He also said that these two young people are very diligent. They obviously like your novel very much. Isn't The Matrix selecting a director? Maybe you can give it a try." Eric smiled and continued to flip through the hundreds of sketches in his hand. He asked knowingly, "What are their names?" Chris said, "They are two brothers. The older brother is called Larry Wachowski, and the younger brother is called Andy Wachowski. They have already produced a script in Hollywood. Oh, there is their contact information in the package." As Chris said that, the little girl helped Eric open the package and took out an envelope. She handed it to Eric. Eric took the letter and read it. It was written to Jeffrey. The tone of the letter was sincere, hoping that Jeffrey could recommend them to be the directors of The Matrix. Chris then explained, "My father said that the two brothers were probably worried that if they sent these to Firefly, they would probably be disposed of like garbage before they could reach you. That's why they found another way to contact him." Eric put the letter and the sketches into the envelope. He smiled and said, "I will consider this matter carefully. But now, let's talk about the meeting with Owen Jacobs." Chris knew that with Eric's taste in movies, if the two brothers could really take on the role of the director of The Matrix, Eric would definitely not be stingy with this opportunity. Therefore, he did not say anything else and went along with Eric's topic. "I have bought 1 million shares of Qualcomm from Firefly Investment. However, there are only 6 million shares in the market after all. Our purchases during this period should have been noticed by others. Recently, Qualcomm's share price has risen to $19.60, an increase of nearly 15%, and the number of shares sold is decreasing. I'm afraid it won't be easy to continue absorbing 3 million shares in the market." Hearing Chris and Eric talking about the boring company data, the little girl obviously lost interest. She got up and pulled Emily and Kelly to the kitchen. Eric stepped aside to let the women leave. He said, "If you can't buy it, then forget it. If we can settle the next matter, we can ask Qualcomm to directly invest in Firefly to increase the number of shares." Chris nodded. He actually had the same idea. He said, "In addition, I have also recently investigated the information of the three major operators, AT&T, Verizon and Sprint. CDMA is definitely not going to work for AT&T. At the same time, a group of operators relying on AT&T will definitely follow it and choose GSM technology. However, Verizon and Sprint have not yet decided on the technical standard. As long as we can pull either of them into the CDMA camp, our investment in Qualcomm will be worthwhile. As for the C-tier licenses, according to the current situation and the somewhat ridiculous lawsuit, I think that this part of the licenses will eventually be swallowed up by the three major operators in the future. It is unrealistic for CDMA to seek a breakthrough in this area," Chris said and handed some prepared materials to Eric. He said, "It is not impossible to pull Verizon and Sprint into the CDMA camp. This is the financial information of the two companies. You will understand after you take a look." Chapter 688. Eric flipped open the information Chris handed over and began to read. Compared to AT&T, the telecom giant with a market value of more than $80 billion and annual profits of more than $4 billion, the other two large telecom companies trying to enter the mobile communications market, Verizon and Sprint, were far worse off. Verizon's predecessor was Bell Atlantic, which was dismembered from the original AT&T in the 1984 telecom monopoly case. After 10 years of development and integration, Verizon's current market value was $23 billion. However, in recent years, Verizon had been in a state of poor performance. Last year, it lost $754 million. In comparison, Sprint, which was not part of the Bell family, only had a market value of $10.5 billion. However, Sprint's operating conditions were far better than Verizon's. Its annual profits in 1994 reached $880 million. Perhaps because of this good performance, Sprint was ambitious enough to set up a nationwide wireless communications network. Therefore, during the auction of A-tier and B-tier licenses, the wireless spectrum licenses it obtained in the end even exceeded the combined value of the two telecom giants, AT&T and Verizon. Sprint would have to bear as much as $1.5 billion in spectrum licensing fees. This expenditure alone was equivalent to Sprint's net profit for 2 years if it maintained its current operating condition. After reading the information, Eric more or less understood why Chris said that it was not impossible to pull Verizon and Sprint into the CDMA camp. Although these two companies were considered giants in the U.S. telecommunications industry, they were far from being comparable to the big brother, AT&T. Due to several mergers and acquisitions in recent years, Verizon had accumulated a huge debt of $8.9 billion, which was equivalent to 38% of the company's market value. This was the main reason why Verizon had been losing money in recent years. This spectrum license auction had added another $600 million to its debt. If it wanted to complete the construction and successful operation of the mobile communications network, its debt ratio was likely to exceed 50% in the next few years. Sprint's situation was not that good either. Although its original operating condition was very good, the company's expansion in the mobile communications field this time was too big. The $1.5 billion in spectrum license expenses, and the huge amount of funds needed to build a national mobile communications network in the next few years, might even lead it to follow the same path as Verizon for a long time in the future. The rich and powerful AT&T did not hesitate to choose GSM technology as its mobile communications network standard. There was no need to consider factors such as the possibility that GSM would be eliminated by more advanced third-generation communications technology in the future. However, Verizon and Sprint, which were in a tight financial situation, had to carefully consider the cost factors of the technical standards they chose next. Although CDMA technology was not commercially available for the time being, Many experimental evidence proved that CDMA had a huge advantage over second-generation digital communication technologies, such as GSM, in terms of spectrum capacity and network construction cost. Chris patiently waited for Eric to finish reading the information and said, "In addition to CDMA itself, if Firefly shows interest in the telecommunications industry and publicly invests in Qualcomm, it is very likely that Verizon and Sprint will lean toward CDMA, because with the further expansion of the debt burden of the two companies, whether it is debt financing or equity financing, the difficulty of obtaining funds will be greatly increased. Firefly has abundant funds in its hands that they desperately desire. Even if we do not provide direct financial support to the two companies, they will be inclined to cooperate with Qualcomm, which has the strong backing of Firefly." Eric nodded and leaned back on the sofa. His fingers gently rubbed the information in his hand, but some other thoughts appeared in his mind. No matter which country, the telecommunications industry was monopolized by certain giants. If it had not been for the famous telecommunications anti-monopoly case in 1984, AT&T would have been the company with the highest market value in the United States. Even if it had been split into 7 subsidiaries, AT&T, with a market value of more than $80 billion, was still one of the top 5 corporate giants in the United States. General Electric, which was ranked first, had a market value of more than $90 billion. In the United States, AT&T's monopoly did not occur with administrative support. If AT&T wanted to expand further, it would be restricted by the Federal Anti-Monopoly Department. However, even after a large-scale split, AT&T's monopoly status was difficult to break. After more than 100 years of development, AT&T had a perfect national fixed-line telephone communication network. This network was not only costly, but it could not be easily built in 3 to 5 years. Many emerging companies wanted to develop their own telecommunications business, and most of the time, they even needed to rent communication lines from AT&T. Under such circumstances, it was basically impossible for latecomers to catch up or even surpass AT&T. However, with the arrival of the new wave of technology, 2 important opportunities that could break the industry's pattern appeared: the rise of the mobile telecommunications industry and the internet broadband industry. At present, these 2 industries were in their infancy. Except for Eric, who was a transmigrator, no one knew what scale these 2 industries would develop to in the future. However, Eric knew very well that 20 years later, either the mobile telecommunications or the internet broadband industry would far surpass the fixed-line telephone business that AT&T relied on to maintain its monopoly. Even before Eric's rebirth, many households no longer installed fixed-line telephones. However, mobile phones and broadband had gradually become necessities in people's lives. Although the recent auction of C-tier licenses had been delayed due to the somewhat absurd lawsuit, it indicated that latecomers who wanted to enter the telecommunications industry would still have to face heavy industry barriers, both overt and covert. However, these barriers were nothing to Eric, who already had a huge amount of capital in his hands. In some online gaming terms, he did not need to start from scratch like those newbie accounts in the newbie village. Instead, he could spend money to buy a good high-level account and enjoy the game directly. Moreover, he currently had 2 good game accounts in his hands. Eric knew a little about the future prospects of these 2 companies. Verizon, Sprint, and AT&T would become the 3 giants of the American telecommunications industry in the future. He guessed that this future situation would be caused by the 3 companies, especially Verizon and Sprint, who were now sparing no effort in the mobile telecommunications industry. At this time, other telecommunications companies in the United States that were comparable to Verizon and Sprint, such as Bell South and Northern Telecom, would also gradually be eliminated or swallowed up by other companies because they missed this important industrial revolution. Moreover, because the payment of spectrum licensing fees and the construction of a nationwide mobile telecommunications network would require a huge amount of capital, now was the best time to invest in these 2 companies. Eric also knew that this should be the final moment. If he missed this opportunity, it would be very difficult for him to get another one. Due to the arrival of the new technology wave, when the Nasdaq index began to soar in the next few years, whether it was Verizon or Sprint, They only needed to issue a small amount of shares in the circulation market to raise enough funds for their development. Therefore, it was impossible for them to bring in a major shareholder like Firefly, who could change the company's equity structure. Even if they were willing, with the skyrocketing market value of the two companies, Firefly would not be able to come up with enough funds. Chris saw that Eric had suddenly fallen into deep thought. He waited patiently for a while before asking, "Eric, what are you thinking about?" Eric came back to his senses, waved the documents in his hands, and asked directly, "Chris, between Verizon and Sprint, which one do you think is more likely to accept our investment?" Chris raised his eyebrows. Just as he was about to speak, the intercom near the two of them beeped a few times. Eric got up and pressed the intercom button. The voice of the manners guard came out. "Mr. Williams, Mr. Jacob, and Mr. Salmasai have arrived." Chapter 689. In order to describe in detail the advantages of CDMA over the first-generation FDMA analog signal technology and the second-generation TDMA digital signal technology, we've made a model similar to a cocktail party. If we compare each communication channel of the operator to a cocktail party for social interaction, Owen Jacobs could not wait to promote Qualcomm's CDMA technology to Eric during the meal at the Sharp Corner Manor. The FDMA form of cocktail party allows only two guests to have a one-on-one conversation at a time. The communication efficiency of this technical form is extremely low. The TDMA form of cocktail party allows many guests to take turns to communicate with the other party at the same time. Although it improves the utilization of communication channels, in fact, only one user can be allowed to speak at a time. Our CDMA form of cocktail party completely breaks this limitation. It allows many groups of communication objects to communicate in different languages at the same time. Therefore, with this more efficient utilization of communication bandwidth, the cost of building a mobile communication network using CDMA technology will be far lower than the second-generation digital signal technology. There were 4 men and 3 women sitting on both sides of the long table in the dining room. Eric, Chris, and the others were listening carefully to Owen Jacobs' explanation. Only Xiao Nina seemed a little absent-minded. However, Owen Jacobs' simple description made it easy for her to accept the advantages of CDMA. She looked at Eric, who nodded slightly, blinked, and pretended to be curious. She asked with a serious expression, "Mr. Jacobs, since CDMA is better than, well, the other two technologies, why did AT&T choose GSM as the technical standard?" Eric turned his head and glared at Xiao Nina, who was interrupting, but he didn't scold her. Instead, he looked at Owen Jacobs. Owen Jacobs didn't feel awkward at all because of this question. He smiled and explained, "Miss Drew, you paused for a moment just now. You must have some doubts about the term I said. Please allow me to explain it to you. The full name of GSM is the Global Mobile Communication System. It is a more mature digital communication technology, developed on the basis of the second-generation TDMA digital technology. There are many reasons why AT&T chose GSM technology. The most important reason is that GSM technology matured earlier than CDMA technology and became commercially available. AT&T has very strong capital and doesn't have to worry about the construction cost of a mobile communication network, so they will choose GSM technology that has been widely promoted. So far, there is no mature commercial network for CDMA technology, which is also our biggest disadvantage. However, Qualcomm has accumulated 10 years of research and development experience in CDMA technology. We are very confident that CDMA technology is now very mature. As long as we can get a commercial opportunity, we can definitely prove the superiority of CDMA to everyone. Owen Jacobs' eyes fell on Eric at the end. Eric didn't immediately satisfy some of Owen Jacobs' expectations. Instead, he said, "Owen, do you know Nokia?" Owen Jacobs' expression changed slightly. Of course, he knew about Nokia, a communication equipment and mobile phone manufacturer that rose quickly from the edge of bankruptcy. He said, "If I remember correctly, Nokia's controlling shareholder is an overseas company called the Hawaii Fund, and the Hawaii Fund is an overseas investment fund set up by Firefly Investments. Eric nodded. His purpose of setting up the Hawaii Fund was to avoid the high corporate income tax in the United States by intercepting Nokia's future profits overseas, just like Apple. This method of tax avoidance was completely legal, so Eric didn't deliberately hide the fact that Firefly Investments was actually Nokia's controlling shareholder. Noticing a trace of doubt in Owen Jacobs' expression, Eric could roughly guess what the other party was thinking. Nokia had developed into one of the top communication equipment and mobile phone manufacturers in Europe in the past 2 years. Its strength was second only to Ericsson, but the gap was getting smaller and smaller, and there were even signs of overtaking it. The reason why Nokia rose rapidly in just over 2 years, in addition to the huge development funds injected by Firefly, was that Nokia was ahead of other communication manufacturers in the technical layout of GSM technology and the rapid popularization of GSM technology. GSM technology could be said to be the foundation of Nokia's rise. However, although GSM technology had been widely popularized in Europe and Asia, it was still in the initial stage of development in North America. Although AT&T, the largest telecommunications giant in North America, had identified GSM as its main mobile communication technology standard, the construction of AT&T's GSM network had actually just begun. Therefore, in Owen Jacobs' opinion, what Eric should do now was to assist Nokia in promoting GSM technology in North America and enter the North American market, not to extend an olive branch to GSM Technology's competitor, CDMA. Eric did not wait for Owen Jacobs to ask and took the initiative to explain. Owen, I know you must have some doubts, but in my opinion, there is no conflict between supporting the development of Qualcomm and Nokia, because GSM and CDMA are two completely different generations of mobile communication technology standards. Qualcomm and Nokia should also be two completely different companies. I even hope that Qualcomm and Nokia can form a close cooperation in the future. We will discuss these in detail in the future. I just mentioned Nokia for another reason. Although Nokia's current development is very rapid, in the second half of last year, Nokia also experienced a very major corporate crisis. Chris knows this better than I do. He has been working on this matter for a long time at the end of last year. Let him say it. Everyone looked at Chris. Although Chris was a little puzzled as to why Eric suddenly mentioned this matter, he still explained. Before 1992, Nokia only produced a few 100,000 mobile phones a year. However, after 1992, due to the strong market demand brought about by the popularization of GSM technology, Nokia's communication equipment and mobile phone sales have increased exponentially. Last year, Nokia's mobile phone sales alone reached 3.1 million units. The rapidly expanding production demand almost caused the collapse of Nokia's component supply chain. Therefore, Nokia's CEO, Yoma Alala, and I spent a few months at the end of last year to completely rectify Nokia's supply chain to ensure that Nokia's production capacity can meet the continuing expansion of the mobile communication market. Owen Jacobs had been racking his brains to promote CDMA technology, but he had never considered the long-term problem. However, when he heard Chris talk about the crisis Nokia experienced last year, he realized something. Eric also said at this time, as far as I know, except for some manufacturers who are still producing the first generation of analog signal mobile phones in the market, almost all the digital mobile phones produced by mainstream communication manufacturers are of the GSM standard. Qualcomm has been focusing on technology research and development for the past 10 years, and it does not have much ability to produce CDMA equipment. So once CDMA technology is selected as the technical standard by any large communication operator, what does Qualcomm plan to use to cope with the sudden market demand of millions of CDMA devices? You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.